Hello everyone and welcome to the C++ 101 class. This is Friday night, Friday the 13th as a matter of fact, 2012. Welcome. So this is the first of an 8-week class that is going to be taking place over 9 weeks. Now we are running 2 C++ classes each week, one on Mondays and one on Fridays. So we're trying to work out with you guys whichever time might be the easiest. But for this very first class, both on Monday and Friday, it has been open to the general public. So there are a lot of you that have never programmed in C++ before that are joining us tonight just to kind of get a feel for what C++ is all about. Now, first, I'd like to start out by welcoming our instructor, Mr. Nelson LeKay. Say hi, Nelson.
Hey.
All right. Ooh, and you sound energized, too. That's a good thing. So Nelson will be our lead instructor throughout the next 9 weeks. So the 2 classes are 101 classes. They are for complete beginners. Now, let me try to stress this the best I can. Complete beginners, meaning that if you're coming in here with a lot of C++ experience, Nelson, your typing is actually overrunning my voice. If you are coming in to this class with prior background C++ experience, this class is not targeting you. Please keep that in mind. We are targeting those that are completely new to C++. It is very important to point this out and for you guys to understand it. I am recording this session. I will be making this session freely available for everyone to download later tonight or first thing in the morning, depending on how late we go tonight. And you will be welcome to download this video and keep it on your laptop, computer, or whatever, and just scrub through it and find parts that might be of interest to you. But there were a few people that had sent complaints from Monday's class because we didn't get into much more complex stuff. And this is a 101 class for beginners, so I want to be as clear about that as I possibly can. Now, our Monday classes are going to be meeting at 3 p.m. Central Daylight Time, and Friday classes are going to be meeting at 7 p.m. Central Time, the time that you're in here right now, so every Friday. Also, I want to point out that we will be giving open office hours. We've done it through the last 2 classes we just finished, actually 3 classes. We did 2 different C# 101s, and we did a Blender 101. And we try to hold an open office session at least once a week for our students to come into, and it's open time. They can ask questions about anything that they're having trouble with, and we can log into your screen or jump over to your screen, and we can help solve the problem and do our best to make sure you understand what is going on. So that's very important to keep in mind, and we encourage all of our students to take advantage of it because we're giving you guys our time. Now, along with the webinar software, we also use a web-based application that Nelson wrote called BuzzNet. Now, we're not going to be using BuzzNet tonight. It is for the regular class once it gets going with session number 2 on Monday. And most of you guys that are currently in this class that will be kicking off on Monday have already been with us through the C# 101 class or Blender class, so you're familiar with BuzzNet. But it is an application where you guys will be able to chat with one another, and it's used primarily for interaction with you guys as far as not just chat, but participation, so we can see which students are following along with us, and if you need another minute if you're working on something, or if you're ready to go, or if you're just in trouble. But again, we will not be using BuzzNet today. Instead, for today, if you would like to join into the IRC channel, we are using the IRC. And Nelson, if you could quickly bring up a browser. For those of you that do not have an IRC client, you could just head over to 3dbuzz.com. As Nelson is demonstrating right now with his browser. At the top, there is a chat option in the menu. Just click on it. And then once Smibbit loads up, from inside here, put your username in. So Nelson's going to just put in another name since he's already in the IRC. Hit connect. Here's the important part. When you connect, it defaults you into the 3D Buzz channel. You will need to join the hash class channel. See, already we were starting to get a flood of people coming in. This is what you need to type. And NATO is NATO, I love you, man. NATO's in there helping people out. You'll need to type a /join space #class and hit enter. And that will put you guys over into the IRC with many of our other regular students who know we're always over there when we're doing the free sessions like this. Now, I did have some concern from a member sponsor the other day who said, you know, I've been waiting for the C++ class, and I'm a member sponsor and I'm paying, and you know, you finally gave it to us, but you're making the first session for free. I feel kind of gypped. I want to point something out. Prior to this class actually being set up for everyone to register and me making the announcement about it being free, it was touted as being a 6-week class. So after working with Nelson and trying to get the syllabus all put together, I decided that it would be best if this was an 8-week class. And we went ahead and gave the very first session out for free for all of you guys, for those of you that have never touched this before and you're interested in giving it a try. So hopefully tonight you will really walk away with something, which would be great. And again, if you're having difficulty with what's being covered, grab the video after I get it encoded and put it up on 3D Buzz and watch it. Go from there. So anyways, IRC, everybody should be in now. Next thing I want to talk about real quick is class durations. Now, I know that there are some people that are very picky about the times. If it says it's going to start at, you know, this time and go for exactly 2 hours, well, almost always we're quite beautiful at firing things up at 5 minutes till all the way up until right on the hour, unless the webinar system at Citrix is having a little bit of trouble. And in that case, it's only cost us about a 5-minute delay before with the programming classes. Then we generally give about 5 minutes for people to come straggling into the system because there's always late people. After about 5 minutes, we kick things off. This is very important for you guys to understand because this is beyond some people's comprehension. We are not here as professors that are just looking to make a paycheck. We are here as instructors wanting to share information, to truly teach you guys. And we had a couple of people in our final C# 101 final exam class last night get a real taste of just how serious we are about wanting to make sure that you truly understand this stuff, as we ended up working very late with one final individual over on his screen just to really make sure he grasped the concepts of what's going on. But because we're not watching a clock, waiting for the 2-hour mark to end and then we clock out and boot everyone off, we just keep going. And that results in classes that go for generally longer than 2 hours. I think we managed to hit the 2-hour mark one time throughout both C# 101 classes. I know Zach hit it a couple of times with the Blender class, but please note, we've had 3-hour classes, and I think worst case scenario has been around a 5-hour class. But before you start to panic, all of these sessions are recorded and they are put up on 3D Buzz for our member sponsors to watch later. So if you have to come late, or if you have to leave early, or if you're just getting too tired because we've been going for so long, do not stress it. You can go back to the video later, and remember, with a video player, you have a scrubber. How cool is that? With a scrubber, you can jump to the parts that are of interest to you. So please keep that in mind. Again, I'm not here for people who want to clock in and clock out at 2 hours. I'm here for making sure that those that truly want to learn this stuff learns it, and so is Nelson. That does bring us up to the word breaks. We try to take breaks about once an hour, because I know, after an hour's time, people need to take the headphones off for a second. They need to get up, they need to stretch, they need to use the bathroom, they need to handle stuff, get a drink, whatever. So we do take breaks, just letting you guys know. When we take breaks, I do pause the video and then resume it after the break is over. So if you watch the video later, you do not have to suffer through 10 minutes worth of silence for the most part. And that is the length of our breaks, generally 10 minutes. The next thing I'd like to talk about is certificates. Oh yeah, and for those of you right now that are, tapping your foot and you're saying, come on, let's get to C++. This is day number 1 of this class, so we've got to do the announcements first. Sorry, but I'm getting close to being done. So for those of you that are going for the certificate in this class, which it is a certificate class from us, there are some things that must be completed, and we are sticklers on this. Number one, this is very important. You must have at least 50% attendance for the class. Now, the cool thing about the way we are doing this is the class, we have two classes, one on Monday, one on Friday. If one week you show up on a Monday, and then the next week you skip, then the week after that, let's say you watch the video instead, the week after that you show up on a Friday because you couldn't do Monday, it still works, okay? So you'll get credit if you show up for the Monday or Friday. With that being said, this is also very important to understand. We welcome those of you that like to take advantage of this to come and sit in on both classes if you have the time and availability. We never present, we present the same topics, but the examples are almost never the same, and the questions are different for the most part. And so that's very cool. You end up with two different teaching or learning experiences. All right. Also, there will be no homework for week number one. So for all of you guys that have been jamming with us through the other 101 classes that we've had, just letting you know, we're not going to have homework in this first week for the simple fact that between the two classes we've dealt with, we're going to be dealing with over 1,000 people. It's just too much for doing homework. All right, next thing I'd like to do. Since we're not using BuzzNet for questions, we will be using the webinar system. In the webinar system software that launched, you have an area where you can ask questions. Feel free to ask questions. There's already a handful of questions that are over there right now. You guys cannot see other people's questions. That's just simply the way that the software was designed and the way we have it running. So, which is good because sometimes there are questions that don't need to be seen by everyone. If you ask a question, just be patient. We'll try to get to you when we can. Since this class is so big, we have to handle our interactivity with you guys a little bit different than we did from Monday's class. And even Monday, there were a couple of complaints that came in about us being too interactive with all of the questions that were coming in from students. But it's something we love to do because we get lots of outstanding questions that other people are probably just too scared to ask. But this time we're going to try to answer questions in groups. Every, I don't know, who knows, every 15 minutes or whenever it's appropriate. So please just be patient with us. There's a lot of people that are in this class. So that is where I want you guys asking questions. And here's one that just came in that I will mention real quick about BuzzNet. We're not using BuzzNet tonight, and the BuzzNet app is simply just a link that you'll go to on a web browser. That's all. And all modern browsers support it just fine. Okay, so moving on down, I'm looking back over here at the list of things I wanted to go over. Also, for those of you that have never been through one of our classes, and you can ask this over in the IRC, it's a lot easier to and a lot more interactive in our regular 101 classes because our regular 101 classes don't have 1 million people in them. So it's very easy for us to get to everybody quickly. So keep that in mind. All right, so moving right along, next thing I want to talk about, and questions over in the IRC. Do not ask questions over in the IRC if you are wanting an answer from us. Nelson, as a matter of fact, I would prefer you not to even look at the IRC until we're rather on break or until a little bit later on into the session because this IRC is just flooding with so much stuff going by. All right, we will be doing some participation stuff later on. And with the participation stuff, that means that we're going to simply let you guys know that, all right, if you want to follow along, this is what you're going to need to type out. I want everybody to, this is where I get to see how many people are going to be able to follow some instructions. Look over at your webinar software, and there is a place where you can raise your hand. Find it. Raise it. Faster? Oh, you guys are slow tonight. All right, good. Few. Wow, so many people to scroll through. All right. If you were unable to find it, ask over in the IRC and somebody will be able to help you. I would say maybe 80% of you guys, 75% of you guys managed to raise your hands. The other 25%, Well, we got to get going. Don't have time to worry. Everybody, hands down. Go fast. Excellent. So 95% of you guys put your hands down quickly. This is the way it works. When we want you to follow along with something, we'll ask everyone to raise their hand, and then as you finish at your own speed, put your hand down. That's a way for us to quickly gauge how many people are still working on stuff. And then the final thing that I want to say before I hand it over to Nelson is for those of you that are new member sponsors to 3D Buzz, welcome. I hope you find the regular $35 a month member sponsor charge that we charge everyone to be the most amazing price you've ever paid for what we're offering, as we have thousands of hours worth of streaming videos that are available, and now we're doing loads of these live classes and interacting with people that are interested in actually learning specific content. And next week we have the UDK, Introduction to UDK class kicks off. It's a 6-week class. It's on Monday and Thursday, so that's 2 different classes. Also on Thursday we have the C# 102 class that will kick off. And then I have some awesome networking classes that I need to talk to you about later, Nelson, that are just absolutely, it's a very wicked idea, but I got to run it by you first before I say anything to anybody. All right.
Alrighty. And I do just really quickly want to stress that, because people were asking in the IRC while you're talking earlier, what's the price of these courses, blah, blah, blah. I just want to stress the fact that a membership at 3D Buzz for $35 a month gives you access to all of the courses.
Yes. You can take
all of them
if you have the free time to. This is our job, so this is what we do. We want to teach people. So we're here all the time, it seems like. All right, Nelson, make sure you have the syllabus somewhere handy. I want to make sure that we get everything covered. But we will, again, as I said to you a little bit earlier, we are going to handle the software part a little bit differently. I do want you to walk through talking about where to get each of the different operating systems IDEs, but we're not going to wait for everyone to get them installed, download it. We don't have time, and this class is huge.
Okay. And someone was asking in the webinar panel if their screen was stuck because they were seeing, this is my wallpaper, and we're not going to be using any webcams. Like, I think someone thought that they should be seeing the instructor, but we're just looking at my screen. So, alrighty. Time to talk about IDEs?
Time to talk about IDEs. Well, first of all, better yet, time to talk about what is C++.
All right, C++ is a programming language.
Aha, now see, now we get to act naturally. First, for everybody that's over in the IRC, just put me if you are completely new to C++ and programming.
Yeah, if you're completely new to programming, because...
So see, for all of you guys that have experience, look at all these guys right here. These guys are here because they're wanting to learn this stuff. So no, we can't jump to some of the cool stuff that's now being provided by C++ 11. We're here for these guys, so please keep that in mind.
Alrighty. So what C++ is? C++ is a programming language. It's a low-level programming language that's been around for a very, very long time. A programming language is basically like it's a language. It's a set of syntax, and it's basically a grammar that you can use to describe logic or instructions that can be understood by a computer. So we're going to be sitting here and seeing a lot of text. We're going to learn the syntax of how we structure that text in order to get a certain logical idea across to the computer. Now, C++ is a compiled language, meaning that we take the text files that we write with C++ code in them, and we run them through a program called a compiler. The compiler then takes those text files and turns it into an executable program that can be inherently understood by the computer that we're running on. I do want to point out really quickly that C++ is not a cross-platform language in the sense, as well, it is, but the executables that it generates are not portable. So depending on which compiler you compile your C++ to, you would only be able to run that program on that specific computer. That doesn't mean you can't take the same C++ code, run it through a different compiler, and run on a different operating system, but yeah.
Hey, Nelson.
We're going to be, yes.
Can you pull your mic down a little bit? I think you're a little close, and your S's and all are popping pretty hard.
Okay, what about now?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, so we're going to be covering or talking about the three different compilers, 3 different operating systems. we're going to be using the Visual C++ compiler provided by Microsoft for the Windows operating system. We are going to be using the GCC compiler for Linux, and we are going to be using I believe it's provided by Apple, the C++ compiler on Mac OS.
It is.
Now, there's a tool that we're going to be using on each one of these three operating systems, different tools but the same type, and that's called what's called an IDE, or an integrated development environment. An integrated development environment is a tool that we can use in order to write programming code effectively. So it gives us a lot of functionality that we can use to streamline our development. Now, all of the IDEs that we are going to be using will have knowledge of the compilers that are appropriate for the current operating system. So the IDE is really just a text editor with a lot of special features that make it appropriate for writing code, and then it'll have an integration with the compiler. So when we ask the IDE to run our program, it'll take our code, shoot it off to the compiler will give us an executable, and it'll run it. So on Windows, we are going to be using the Visual C++ compiler. On Mac OS, we are going to be using the Visual C++ IDE/compiler. Mac OS, we are going to be using Xcode. Linux, and the specific Linux distro we're going to be using, or at least demoing Ubuntu, we're going to be using Eclipse CDT. Now, I do want to point out that out of all three of these tools, Eclipse CDT is the only one that's going to run on all three operating systems, but we're going to be using it for Linux. Okay, someone asked, I'm using Dev C++ Bloodshed, is this okay? Dev C++ Bloodshed is a very old IDE, and it's most likely packaged with a very old version of the GCC compiler. I would highly not recommend doing that. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys a link for the Microsoft Visual C++ 2010 Express. Now, if you jump over to the first link, you'll be able to, I don't want the beta. I really don't want the beta. You'll be able to grab the Visual C++ 2010 Express edition right here. The Express edition of Visual Studio C++ is absolutely free, and you'll be able to follow along with everything we're doing using it. So if you go ahead and download this, you will have all of the software you need on Windows in order to complete this course. Alrighty. So, yes, well, should I bring over my Mac or what?
Yeah.
Okay, for Mac, and I'm team viewed here into a laptop. For Mac, if I can get my, oh, this is a sick joke. Come on, I know you want to. There you go. And, wow. Okay, I'm just going to use this. Go ahead and launch Xcode.
Now, for those that don't have it, you might want to talk about the App Store real quick.
Yes, the App Store is where you can go ahead and grab Xcode from. And if you have macOS Lion, which I believe does come with the App Store. Oh, come on. There. No. Okay, I'm just going to have to use the Finder again. If you guys haven't noticed, I am not a
Mac
OS user very often. If you go ahead and grab the App Store and type in Xcode in the search bar, you'll be able to grab it and install it for free from the Mac Store.
So it's as simple as that. Get it installed.
Yep. Okay, so once you get Xcode, you will not see this, obviously. You will see, oh, well, let me bring up Xcode again. You will see this. So once you see this, then you're good. And we'll talk about how to go ahead and start a project later once we get to that point in the other IDs. So make sure that you have Xcode.
All right, so let's go.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take a look now over at Ubuntu.
Okay, Ubuntu. If you are using Ubuntu or Aptitude or have access to or if you are using Ubuntu with Debian and have access to the Aptitude Package Manager, simply install it via Aptitude, and it's going to be a package called Eclipse-CDT. This package will also install the GCC compilers if you do not already have them. So go ahead and install this. You could similarly install this from the software, the GUI interface to Aptitude, but I don't really know how to navigate that. At that point, you will get a program somewhere called Eclipse that you can launch, and we'll start talking about that later.
Okay, cool. So that's the quick where to get each of these. Now, did you want to spend just a minute? This is an appropriate time to look over at the questions panel. There's been a few different questions that have come in about some of the different IDEs.
Okay. What are the limitations of the Express version of the C++ IDE? There's a variety of limitations that really shouldn't concern a person just starting out. Mainly, you can't install plugins, for example. One of the most popular plugins being the Visual Assist. The other limitations, I don't believe there are any licensing limitations with the Express products. But again, the biggest one is the fact that, first of all, they're not combined into the same IDE, meaning that when you get Professional, Visual Studio Professional, you'll get one IDE that contains support for, excuse me, Visual Basic, F#, C#, and C++. If you get the Express editions, they will all be individual. So you'll have a few features, miscellaneous features here and there that won't work properly, and you won't be able to install plugins. How about code blocks? I have not kept up with code blocks development, but if you can type C++ code into it and it gives you an executable, then it should be fine. Same thing with C++ Builder. I've never used that. Will this VC++ 2010 work fine in Windows 8? Yes, it will. Can you try to load the webinar in Ubuntu? I tried and it said it's incompatible with Linux. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all Citrix, so.
All right. Any reason to install the SQL SP1? Only if you want the download to take longer or you need it for some specific purpose. What do Windows users need besides Express 2010? Nothing. If you have this program, then this is all you need. Alrighty, how useful is C++ for game design? Well,
we'll get into discussing things like that here in just a few minutes when we start talking about the language itself. Okay, so that gets you through the questions dealing with the IDEs. Again, for those of you that have not yet got an IDE installed, you're welcome to take this time to start downloading it. And we did wait for everyone on Monday. That class, while huge, was still considerably smaller than this class. And so that we can keep things going smoothly, we're going to just continue on from this point. But remember, I will be putting the video out of this so you can still follow along with all of the practical stuff later. Okay? I do want to mention this because I saw Segfault mentioning Resharper. And this was something that we use heavily for C#. And for those of you that are member sponsors, all you'll need to do is PM Zach. We've been working with JetBrains, the individuals that make Resharper, which is an amazing tool. And we get they're allowing us to give you guys a 1-year license. And I'll tell you guys right now, that thing is worth every penny to actually buy it. And the 1 year that they originally gave us just expired, and they were cool enough to turn around and give us another year. So we'll continue to be sweet to them, and hopefully they'll continue to be sweet to us, and it just rolls right downhill to you guys. So again, just PM Zach over on 3D Buzz. I think Resharper, what are the costs? Do you remember right offhand? For the professional one, it's $250 or somewhere around there.
I thought it was around $300. I can't remember.
$300, worth every penny. But let's yes. And for private, yeah, I guess around $160 for personal.
Okay, I have access to 2008 full. Will using that during the course slow down learning? It might. I am not sure. I'm not sure. The difference between the IDE is not going to be important, but the difference between the compiler might become important when we start talking about a few of the newer features later in this course for the C++11 specification. Will Resharper work with C++ Express? Resharper is not a it's not a C++ tool. It's a C# tool. Okay, so what's next?
Okay, so now that we've talked about IDEs and you've gone over all of that, the next thing we've got up is writing our first program, creating a simple Hello World application. But so, you know what? Before we even do that, actually, no, let's make this work with it, because we can go ahead and write the application. Let's make sure that we show everyone how to turn on line numbers, just in case yours are still left on, and we'll go through this with each of the IDEs on all of the different operating systems.
Okay, so if you are in Microsoft Visual Studio C++ 2010 or 2010 Express, go ahead and hit New Project. We're going to be using a Win32 console application template from the new project dialog that appears. Note that if you have one of the full editions of Visual Studio, you won't just have this Visual C++ tab. You might have the other languages thing that you would have to expand to get to Visual C++. So go ahead, find the Visual C++ template group, click on it, and grab a Win32 console application. Give it a name, and hit OK. And now this is very important. By default, the template comes with a bunch of stuff that we do not want to use, and we will not be really going over. So go ahead and inside the application wizard that pops up, jump over to Application Settings and select Empty Project. We want to start from nothing, and go ahead and hit Finish. Okay, you will get this nice little IDE right here with this project 4 being open, or project whatever you named it. Over here we have the Solution Explorer. Actually, you might have your Solution Explorer over here, and that's fine, but I prefer to have my Solution Explorer on the right-hand side, so I'm just going to drag it over there, otherwise it's going to drive me insane. Either side is fine. You will have a project 4 with these 4 folders. Now, these 4 folders are not physical folders on your hard drive. I want to point that out. Instead, these are virtual folders that we can use to organize our files, our physical files, that we place inside of our project. So go ahead and right-click Source Files, select Add and New Item. Now, if you have the professional edition of C++ Visual Studio, you might get quite a few options here. But in this case, just hunt for the C++ file, CPP. Make sure it is a .cpp file. Do not select the .h file or any of the other files. This is the extension that we want. .cpp files are basically the C++ source code extensions, or .cpp is. .h are header files. We're not going to be covering header files just yet. We will later on in the course. So you want to go ahead and grab a C++ file, give it a name, and the name I'm going to use is going to be main, M-A-I-N. So then go ahead and hit Add. Now you'll notice that we have this nice little main.cpp file, a physical file on our hard drive, which is just a text file, underneath our project 4. Now, inside of main.cpp, we can go ahead and write in some code. And I guess in order to get people or to get a running application on everybody's IDE, the quickest way to do that, I'm just going to write out some code, and we are going to go over every line.
Actually, at this point, I know this will become very boring for the people that are following in Windows, but for those that are sitting there in Xcode and sitting there over in Unix, or Linux, let's go ahead and jump over and get them all to the same point. So then when you come back here, you can begin typing code and everybody can type code.
Okay. Should I do line numbers right now too?
Yeah, go ahead and do line numbers, because we'll do that while we're in each ID. So here we go, Sean. Here's how to do line numbers.
Make sure line numbers are enabled, especially the practical reason for this is especially if we have to switch over to someone's screen, pointing out line numbers is a lot easier when talking to people. So make sure you get those enabled. And how you do so in Visual C++ is you go over to Tools, Options, go down to Text Editor on the left, expand that, go under All Languages, and select General. Now make sure that line numbers is checked.
So repeat that one time, Nelson.
Go to Tools, Options, which is this dialog right here. So that's Tools, Options, Text Editor, All Languages, General, Line Numbers.
All right,
so
sweet.
Go ahead and hit OK.
So ready to jump over to the Mac? All right.
Jumping over to Macland, and there's a lot of lag with mine, so yeah, this is going to be fun. Okay, so you guys should be sitting here on this welcome screen. If you don't see this welcome screen, I believe you can get back to it by hitting Window and then Welcome to Xcode. Go ahead and say Create a new Xcode project. Now you'll get this nice little project wizard. Select on the left here, make sure that you have Mac OS X application selected and grab a command line tool. This is what we're going to be writing. This is the analog to a console or a console window tool that we have in Windows. So go ahead and hit Next. Now give it a name. Give yourself a company identifier. In this case, I'm using my initials. Make sure that the type that you select is C++ and not any one of these other options. And make sure the automatic reference counting is not checked. Click Next. Find a directory to put your application in. I'm just going to use this directory right here. And hit Create. Now, Xcode helpfully created this main.cpp file for us. But what I want everyone to do who is following along with Xcode to select everything and just delete it. Oh, come on. Okay. Also, so if everybody's in Xcode or people who are in Xcode should now be looking at an empty file called main.cpp in a project you just created. Now go ahead and to enable line numbers, we go to Edit, or
further
we go
left.
to Xcode.
There you go.
Preferences. Go to Text Editing right here, this tab, and check line numbers. See how I toggle that, the line numbers appear and disappear. All right, so go ahead and close this, and everybody with Xcode should be ready to go. Jumping over into CDT, now I just want to point this out. When we launch CDT, I'm just going to go ahead and just click on it again. It's going to ask us for a workspace, and the way that Eclipse works is it works with these concepts of workspaces, and every project you create is going to go under a workspace, and a workspace is just a directory. So I'm going to use the default workspace location for my project here and just hit OK. And you should get Eclipse up and running. Now you'll notice that I do have some leftovers from the previous project, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this guy, delete him from the disk. Now this might not be what you see when you launch CDT for the first time. You might just see this big window or this big welcome window that fills the whole screen when you launch it for the first time. Close its tab, and you should be seeing something similar to this, even though it might not be exactly like this. To get the window to look exactly like this, go to your perspectives here on the right, hit Open Perspective, Other, and select C and C++. After doing so, you should have a window that looks like this. Now to create a new project, we can simply go to File, New, C++ Project, select Empty Project, give it a name. make sure that the Linux GCC toolchain is selected. Notice how we can select other toolchains, which will allow us to compile for other platforms on Linux, which is neat. But right now, we just care about compiling against the Linux GCC. So go ahead and hit Next. Make sure that you have your debug and release configurations, and go ahead and hit Finish. Now you should have a project. You can right-click on your project. You can select New, File, and simply type in main.cpp. And you are now where we are in the other IDEs. Now, if you do not see line numbers, simply go to Window, Preferences, General, Editors, Text Editors. Now, once you're in here, you'll have this option to show and hide line numbers.
Okay, so that's a quick walkthrough with getting a new project started on each of the different operating systems. Let's take one moment and answer any questions that have come in.
And remember, we are not answering questions that come into the chat.
That's right. So use the questions panel, please. Okay, Nelson, over in your questions panel, you've got some questions now.
Okay, we're supposed to delete the pre-generated code that appeared in the main.cpp for Xcode. Yes. Although it's very similar to the code we are going to be typing, I really want people to type it out. Segfault's leaving?
Yes, he is. It's very late there.
Asking for myself as well as others, is case sensitivity important for main.cpp? It could be. Depends on your project's conventions. Now, commonly in Unix environments such as Mac OS and Linux, it's very common to use lowercase file names, and it's generally very common in C# on Windows to use uppercase file names. So as a result, I will be using uppercase file names. However, those sort of conventions are going to be up to the team that you are working with. Now, of course, remember that Unix environments, again, such as Mac OS X or Linux, are going to be case sensitive in their file system, whereas Windows will not be.
And Nelson, can I get you to go ahead and pull your mic down just a little bit more? Still just a little bit of clipping in there.
Apparently I'm hurting people. When starting a new project, should we check the box create directory? Yes.
And then there were a couple of other questions you may have missed that came in from Brady just a little bit higher up at 739.
730. Oh.
Why did you?
Because
go ahead and read the question so everybody knows what the question is.
Why did you decide to make an empty console application instead of creating an empty project? I'm not sure if things changed in versions of Visual Studio, but I got in the habit of doing so that specific project settings were set up for me for use with the console application, such as libraries that are automatically included or statically linked to, and other settings for compilation that I really don't want to get into in a beginner class. So as a matter of convenience, I approached it that way. Does C++ for Visual Studio have IntelliSense similar to C#? Similar, yes, but not nearly as good.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move on from there. And if any other questions come in, we'll come back to them shortly. And with this, everybody should be able to follow along in their IDE. And we're going to be working, again, we're going to show you how to build and execute from all of the different OSs. But our primary place of coding will simply be in Visual Studio. So Nelson, in honor of speeding things up, after you type it out here, when we go to the other OSs, instead of retyping it, you could just copy and, well, I don't know how well copy and paste. It might work across TeamViewer.
It's such a small program, I think I can type it out.
Think you can handle it? Let's go.
Yeah. We did get one question about Xcode, which we'll address later when we get to Xcode.
Okay, so
I don't know the answer.
hang tight, David. You're not being forgotten.
Alrighty. So, again, I'm going to explain every bit of code that we're about to type out. But I want for people right now just to type out everything verbatim. We are going to start with a pound symbol, followed by the keyword include. We're going to open up an angle bracket and type in iostream and close the angle bracket. Actually, I do need to talk about some terminology really quickly here. This is a dot. These are angle brackets, or however you spell that. These are curlies. These are squares. These are semis.
This is conversion to Nelson speak.
Yes. And then, of course, these are parens. So, I just want to make this very clear that when I say one of these words, these are the symbols that I'm working with. Okay, so then we're going to open up, we're going to type in the int keyword after the include iostream, and we're going to type in the word main, followed by empty parens, followed by curlies. Inside of our curlies that we have attached to this main definition, we're going to go ahead and say std : cout, or cout, followed by this operator, followed by a double quote. Now the double quote is important. It must be a double quote, not a single quote. Followed by the string literal hello, comma, world, followed by the ending double quote, followed by a semi.
And for those of you that are falling a little behind with what Nelson's typing, if you're trying to type this out, whoa, Nelson, my eyes, you broke them.
Yeah, whenever I switch over to certain,
Anyways, while Nelson's doing that, just to let you guys know, for those of you who feel like you're a little bit behind, don't worry. Just keep typing this out. But in a second, we're going to do the hand thing that I talked about, the hand thing, for us gauging where you guys are at. Is that everything you're wanting to type? You want to type a little bit more, don't you?
Oh, no. I was just waiting for you to. Okay. Followed by std : cin dot get empty parens, followed by semi. Followed by the keyword return, space, and the number literal 0, followed by another semi.
Okay, now it's time to do the hand thing. For those of you that came in late and you don't know what I'm talking about, over in your webinar software, there's a place for you to raise your hand. Everyone who is still typing this out right now, raise your hand. This will let us gauge as far as where you guys are at, and do we have a lot of people having trouble? Or are we down to just two or three people left, or what? So if you are typing this out still, raise your hand. As soon as you are done, put your hand down. So we'll leave it on this screen for just a second.
Every time I switch over to the.
Every time you switch to what?
Every time I click on any of the webinar panels, like the questions panel.
Oh, it switches you.
It switches over to my other VM.
Oh, wow. Okay, so once you have this typed in, make sure to put your hand down. In the meantime, Nelson, if you want to take a look over in the questions panel.
What question when you get the time? My number line's showing up all yellow instead of green. That's a good question. In Visual C++ or in Visual Studio, just in general, the editor will highlight any line that you make a change on without saving as yellow. So notice how I just deleted this semi and replaced it, and maybe I can delete this curly and add it back, how I'm getting these yellow squares. But then when I hit Control S, it turns into green. Steve, not to my knowledge. However, I do believe Visual Assist, that add-in, does provide the functionality of automatically placing closing curlies when you open one. If you are using Notepad++, you will need a compiler. Notepad++ does not come with a compiler, meaning you could write the code, but you won't be able to turn it into an executable program unless you, again, have a compiler installed. So I would highly recommend, if you are on Windows, to grab the Microsoft Visual C++ 2010 Express.
And make sure to read what they are, just so people know what's up.
What they are?
What the questions are when you're answering them.
Yeah. Here it's bad. Why not to use using namespace CDD? We will be going over the using construct.
When I said read out the question, I actually meant in English, not in slur.
Okay, can we change the font? I noticed my monitor has a very small difference between the colors. Yeah, all the font settings are going to be under the tools options, and then they're going to be under environment, fonts, and colors, and you can play around with this dialog to whatever specification you need it to be.
Okay, just one more second. I know there's still several of you guys. I would assume that maybe some of you are forgetting to put your hand down when you type this in. Please put your hand down once you have it typed in, because I know Tim's done by now.
Scott, yes, but I'm not going to answer that, or I'm not going to read that question out loud because it'll be a spoiler for what we're doing. Is this code the exact same in Xcode, or are you going to go over the differences later? This is exactly what you should be typing into Xcode. In fact, this code will compile across all standard compliant C++ compilers.
All right, as people are wrapping up, let's go ahead and retype it over in the other two IDEs real quick.
Yep. Well, I guess we'll do it on Linux first.
I guess so.
This keeps on wanting to pop up. I'm not used to this guy. Okay. So we have that here on our Linux distro, and bringing it up to Xcode, we can go ahead and type in the exact same code. Again, not used to this IDE either. Nor am I used to this lag. This reminds me of the first videos I did with you guys.
Yeah, those were back in the day.
Okay, so, yes. Now, let's go ahead and talk about running these programs really quickly, unless there are some questions. If you're getting an error that talks about looking for what's called a precompiled header, and it's asking something about stdafx.h, the problem is that you did not click, when creating this project, actually, wow, I didn't realize that would close my current project, but still, you did not click application settings empty project. If you do not click empty project, you will get what's something called a precompiled header, along with a few other things that we are not going to be covering just yet. So go ahead and make sure that you click empty project when you create your project. So cancel out of that, and reload the project that we had before. Okay, In C++, we don't have to check type compatibility on the return. Not entirely sure what you mean by that. On mine, there's still an underline. Is there something wrong? Getting some link error, created empty project. Did you create an empty project by selecting empty project? Because let me go ahead and replicate this with that selected and see if it.
He said no.
Oh. James, make sure that you have the keyword int followed by the text domain, and then empty parens followed by an opening curly. You're not going to want to or were you? Oh, never mind. Sorry, I kind of misunderstood that. In C++, this is how you define the type of a method's return. It's not like ActionScript, where you do it after a colon.
Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's go ahead at this point, Nelson, and let's jump through execution, compiling and execution on each of the three OSs.
And as far as what all this means, we will be.
Yeah, we're going to be going over all of it very carefully.
That's the point of this course, is to go over this code line by line and some more. Okay, so inside of Visual C++, if you have this program written out, go ahead and hit the F5 key. I do want to point out that, unfortunately, I had checked a box that makes a particular dialog not show up when I hit F5. And if that box does come up, just hit yes. It'll ask you, are you sure you want to build? And you have to say yes, because you clicked the build button. Why wouldn't you want to build? So yeah, go ahead and hit yes to a dialog box if it pops up. So as a result of running this program, you'll notice that the background of Visual Studio changed a little bit, and we now have this console window. Oh, I hate arrow shake. We now have this console window open with the text that we told it to type out. And we're also noticing that the console window is currently paused and waiting for us to hit the enter key. If I were to hit the enter key, the program would terminate. So again, hit F5 to run the program, hit enter to close the program. So this is a very simple program running inside of a console window. In Xcode, all you have to do is hit this run button up here. The run button is going to compile the project and run it in this little console window down here. Now, if you don't care about all this output, this says output from GDB. Go ahead and click on this all output button and say target output instead, and we'll see the output of our program. But notice that it's still running. It's going to continue to run until I hit enter. And after that, you'll notice that up here it says finished running project because the project has terminated. So in Ubuntu, it's going to be a little bit more complex. In CDT, we have to create what are called build configurations. Now, before we create our build configuration, I want everyone to make sure who is using CDT to make sure and hit the build button, which is going to be under project build all. And as a result, the project will be built or compiled. As you see down here, we have finished building main.cpp. Now, if you want to run this program, there's a problem. We don't have any what are called build configurations set up yet, or maybe I do, but you guys shouldn't. So go into your run configurations, and if you do not have a build configuration set up already, which I'm going to simulate that by deleting it, go ahead and double-click on C++ application. Then, for the project, select project 4, and you will be good. So hit apply and run, and you'll notice we get the output in this window, and we can just hit enter to terminate the program. So, are there any questions about running C++ code in Windows, Linux, or Mac OS? Did everybody type this program out and get it to actually run on their platform?
Everyone that was able to. Everyone that already had the IDE downloaded installed.
Alrighty, it might be a good time to
We're gonna
do a 10-minute break.
Yep.
So people could
we're
questions.
right on the hour of recorded content. So this is where I'm going to hit pause.
Although someone.
All right, I'm recording again. Go ahead.
Can you repeat the run configuration for Linux again? Yeah. Go ahead and down here in this little check, or you could actually go up here to this menu item called Run, and down to this option called Run Configurations. And if you don't see this already, now be sure that you build your project before doing this. Otherwise, you won't be able to. Select the project in the Run configuration. So that's Project Build All. Now go down to Run Configurations. Now, if this isn't already there, if it is, you're fine and you can run your program. If it is not, so I'm going to simulate that by deleting it, simply double-click on C application. And if this doesn't automatically fill with the project you're working on, hit Browse and double-click on the project you want, hit Apply, and now you're set to go. So now when you hit the Run button, it'll automatically run the latest configuration that you built. For Xcode, make sure that you select main.cpp, type out this code, and I don't know what just came up.
It tore off the editor.
Go away. Select main.cpp, and then simply hit the Run button. Again, if you are getting errors that say anything about precompiled headers or stdafx.h, make sure that you create a new project. So open up a new instance of Visual C++, select New Project, go to Win32 Console Application, enter a name. Now go to Application Settings. This part is very, very important, and select Empty Project. After you select Empty Project, you'll be able to create your main.cpp file and place in the code that you see right here, and it'll work just like it does here. All right.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break at this point. I'm pausing video. Okay, we're now back from break. Welcome back, everyone. And Nelson, go ahead and take a look over in the questions panel and see if you can find things that are relevant that need to be discussed.
Alrighty, I viewed some of the older C++ tutorials on buzz.com. Are they still up to date? Some of it, most of it, in fact. There are some exceptions, however. If you jump over to the thread of information in the C++ forum, you'll see some of the exceptions that the old C++ course didn't quite use standard C++, so some of the syntax will not work properly. How do you get into IRC? Should I?
Yeah, you go ahead and show real quick. But while you're bringing that up, pull your mic down if you don't mind. It's just really loud popping.
Apparently, you don't like my voice anymore.
No, Nelson, it's quite sexy. But for some reason, I think I hear the desire for you to get out and party because it's Friday night, and your voice is clipping for some reason.
Okay, jump over to the chat link up here on 3dbuzz.com, enter in a username, and hit connect. Once you are here, go ahead and type in join class. Type that in, hit enter, you will enter the class. Okay, what do I do if there's no run button or option for running Xcode?
Well, let's jump over to Xcode, look at menu options.
Huh.
Uh-oh, do you still have Xcode?
Yes.
There you go.
I do want my drawing course. One of these days,
You are going
course.
to get a drawing course. Zach and I have already been talking about it. Don't worry. We're designing this course specifically for Nelson, and those of you that are member sponsors and you want to join in, you'll be welcome to join in too. Good heavens, Nelson. So there.
Alrighty. So yeah. So if you don't see a run option up here, I actually don't know how you made that not appear. Someone suggested they might be in a text editor. So if you're in the text editor version of Xcode, make sure that you started a project. So when you go to when you see your Welcome to Xcode menu, make sure that you selected Create a New Xcode Project, and you selected Command Line Tool, put in the product name, and so on.
Another couple pieces of information that came in is Steve said that you don't have it because it's running.
It does show up for me while it's running, but that might be different between versions.
And then we had another suggestion of, or tip of, you could hit Command R for running, which is a good one. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so cannot find or open the PDB file. That's interesting. If you, I'm not entirely sure how that can happen. It could be a permissions thing. You might have placed your project in a folder that didn't have permission to, you didn't have permission to edit. I don't know that off the top of my head. You might want to Google that. Can I watch it offline because it's 4 a.m. now here? Yes, we are recording these and making them available for download.
Yeah, you'll be able to download it so you won't even have to worry about streaming or anything.
Will there be a programmer-oriented course videos for 2D gaming? Seems like 2D programmers and 3D for artsy people. We're going to get into game development eventually because that's definitely something. And then here we go, randomly focusing windows. I don't know why. Yeah, that's coming soon-ish. Will this course give us enough info to hit the ground running on the next lesson? No. Yes. This class
you mean
is designed
Monday's lessons? Yeah.
Yeah, they're designed specifically for people running, starting from here, going on to the next classes, then to the next courses. So.
Which API from Chris? DirectX and OpenGL, even though this is way out of the ballpark at the moment, we're still discussing that one. And if I pay late as a member sponsor, can I catch up with what I missed? Yes, you can. But remember, once you miss 50% of the class time, you won't be able to get the certificate. But we will rerun these classes. I've already got quite a few people asking me when the next C# 101 class is going to run again. Because they missed a good chunk of it and they won't actually get the certificate, not just watch the videos. So we will rerun these, but right now we're focusing more on getting further into the series to more intermediate stuff, and then we'll start working those classes in. Okay, Nelson, with that, let's go ahead and jump back over to code now and start breaking it down for everyone.
Oops. Okay, so here's the program you guys should have up. Now, this program is one of the simplest programs you can write in order to get a console window with text appeared on it. The first line is very important. In fact, well, actually, every line that we have here is very important, but the first line does something very specific. What it does is it includes the iostream, or input-output stream header, into our CPP file. What this, in effect, does is it reaches out into the headers made available to us by the C++ compiler. It grabs the iostream header file, and it places it, basically copies and pastes it right here on line 1. So now we have access to all of the functionality provided to us by the iostream header. Now, the iostream header is part of the standard C++ library. So this will be standardized across all implementations of C++. meaning that different compilers might have different individual implementations of iostream, but they will all work the same if they are standard compliant. So again, include iostream, or the include preprocessor declaration. What it does is it grabs a file and it copies and pastes it into wherever we place the include statement. Everything in C++ preceded by a pound symbol is what's called a preprocessor directive, meaning the first phase of compilation, meaning the first thing the C++ compiler does, is it scans the files for these pound symbols, and it performs an action depending on what they are. Somebody asked, should this go in every project? Well, no. This should only go into projects that you are interested in doing input and output to the console. That's specifically what this header provides us. It provides us input and output into the console window, or the terminal window if you're on Unix. After that, we have this int main paren line. Now, int main is what's called the entry point into our application. Now, this whole bit of syntax that you see right here, minus the innards really, but this whole syntax you see here with int main, paren, and then a block of code surrounded by curlies is what's called a function in C++. We will be going over creating our own custom functions very soon here in this course, not in this class specifically. And they are basically, you can think of them as groups of code that is executed sequentially. Now, the int part here is mandated by the C++ specification, but it does have meaning. We will be talking about some basic data types here later in this class, but for right now, think of this as a function, as a block of code that must in some way provide back an integer value or an int value, which is any number, positive or negative, that is a whole number. Now, the main part is also important. This is the identifier. This is the function name. And main is a special function name that is reserved for the entry point into our application, meaning that we can have an int main anywhere in our program, and that's the function that's going to be invoked or executed immediately when our program starts. Can main function generate something other than an integer? The answer is no. Now, you might see some people do stuff like this, where they omit the return type, or this when they have it return void, but int main is the standard way to define your entry point in C++. There is no other standard way. Now, there are optionally some fun things we can put in these parentheses, but we're not going to be covering that just yet. So, for now, this is the entry point to our application. It defines what's called a function. A function is simply a group of code tagged by name, and this code will execute whenever our program starts up. Does it matter if it's capitalized? Yes. C++ is a case-sensitive language, unlike a few languages, Cold Fusion, Visual Basic. C++ is case-sensitive, meaning that the casing of everything that I'm showing on the screen is very, very, very important, and your program will not compile or run properly otherwise.
Now, Nelson, in our Monday class, there was a question that came in, and I do see a few people discussing it right now over in the IRC about why having main return an integer value anyways.
Yeah.
So what could it be used for?
Well, again, just to recap, this integer here specifies, and it's required specifically for main. It's not required for every function that we define. We can place whatever we like here in other functions. But for main, it is mandated, meaning that the int main method, or the int main function, returns an integer value to whoever invoked our program. In fact, we might even see a nice little example of this if we do a Control-Shift-B and look at the output window. Actually, no, it's not going to. Oh, there we go. Check this out. When I launched this program, this text appeared. The program project4.exe has exited with code 0. Now, the integer return value of main is used by whatever program invoked our program to determine if anything went wrong. 0 means that everything went okay. By convention, the convention is 0 means that everything is peachy. If it is non-zero number, what it's going to be is an application-specific return code that you will define within the documentation of your application, so that other people who might be running your program from within their programs would possibly know what went wrong with your application. So it's a nice little tool for debugging other people's programs to know if there was an error running it. People are asking questions in the chat, so please.
And that's okay if people over in the chat want to help them out. That's completely fine. For the questions that you want to get us to answer, please make sure to put them in the questions panel.
Somebody says if you have a void method, which it should be if you have a void function, because that's main's not a method, it's a function, which those two things have different meanings in C++. It will still return a 0. Quite possibly it would. But here's the thing. Void main is non-standard. In fact, I haven't done this for a long time, but let's see if the compiler warns me about it. No, it doesn't. Sadly, the Visual C++ compiler is still not warning me about this code. The problem with this code is it's non-standard and should never be used. Main should always have an integer return type. Otherwise, it is non-standard C++ and is not guaranteed to behave the exact same between different implementations. And someone points out other languages you can have a void main signature. The answer is yes, you can have. Well, that was a statement, but that statement is correct. You can. Other languages do have void main returns. When you say implementations, do you mean platforms? Well, yes and no. You could have a variety of C++ implementations on the same platform. Basically, an implementation of C++ is that specific compiler product. Visual C++ is a specific compiler product, as is GCC, and GCC is a cross-platform product, but it still is a completely different implementation than Visual C++. There are also other C++ compilers as well.
And a couple other questions before we end up moving on, but make sure you take a look at, do we need to declare a global main function, even if you write in classes?
Yes. In C++, you cannot place the entry point inside of a class. That is, again, a difference between other languages that people might be familiar with here, but you will always have to declare a global int main function that returns an integer value.
And Robert asks, can there be more functions besides main in this main.cpp file?
Yes. You can have as many functions as you wish. However, we are not going to be going over the intricacies of functions in C++, because there are some considerations you will have to keep in mind when working with functions in C++ that you don't have to think about in other languages. So for right now, we are sticking with just a single function, which is main, which is the entry point. If you've mastered the Hello World program, yeah, you're pretty much ready to start your own MMORPG.
Woot! All right, so at this point, let's talk a little bit more in regards to the code here. Let's talk a little bit about formatting.
Okay, so when we use curlies, every time you see a curly, you should always indent every preceding line or every subsequent line until you match an ending curly. Now, this formatting convention is incredibly important. Now, I'm sure a bunch of people are going to inform me right now that there are a variety of other formatting conventions, which there are. Oftentimes, well, not oftentimes, but I have seen this convention quite a bit.
C++,
with,
that's actually fairly common. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I still don't really like it, but still, people do this. I've seen people do like that before, which I don't get.
Yeah.
I've seen all sorts of weird things, but for right now, the point here is that we are going to want everybody to properly indent their code. Now, C++ doesn't do any Visual C++ does not do any auto formatting for us, so this is something people are going to have to get familiar with doing manually. So I just want to point out that when an open curly starts, we indent every subsequent
It
line.
makes readability easy. It's very important. The moment everything's all scattered, it becomes very difficult to see what code belongs to what. Remember, the code inside of the open and closing braces there, this is a block of code, in this case belonging to the main function. So it's easy to identify this code because you can simply see where it's indented, scan up to the first thing that's not indented, which should be a brace, and boom, now we see who he belongs to, main.
Right. Okay, so we talked a little bit about functions and a little bit about the entry point, which is our main function.
Also, for beginners, before we get too far away from this, let's also talk about white space and the use of it.
Oh yeah, C++ is a white space insensitive language. So, for example, I can put tabs and new lines and spaces. I can, do a bunch of crazy, gross, disgusting things.
Right now, I want to get a plane ticket and fly out and smack Nelson for doing that. That's horrible.
But I just want to point out that you can place as much white space as you want. C++ does not care about white space. So don't get scared using white space. You'll notice that I very commonly will group related bits of code together and separate them with an empty line. So for example, this line 1, we have our include statement, which again brings in the functionality of the iostream header. Then I have this white space right here. This actually isn't required. I could have just as easily have done this, but I don't like doing that. I like placing nice little empty lines between blocks of related code. In this case, I might have a variety of include statements and then my main function. And I would like to place a white space there to make sure that the pieces of code are grouped logically together. Okay. And you see that I do the same here when I have these two console input and output operations, followed by an empty line, followed by my return statement.
Okay, so we've talked about what, so now you're going to move down into main?
Yep, so just to recap, main is our entry point. This is the definition, this is the signature of main, which is standardized and required to be this for it to work in C++. Now, with a function, with any function, including our entry point, what we have immediately after our signature is going to be a block of code. Now, whenever I say the word block of code, I'm usually going to be referring to code that is encapsulated by curlies. So you see right here how we open up a curly right here, and we end the function by closing the curly right here. This logically groups every single line of code you see inside into the main function. As you can see, I can even, Visual C++ can visually represent this grouping by expanding and collapsing this entire method. So I want to point out that the method starts right after this curly, and it ends right before this curly. And did I say method or function?
I thought you said function.
Okay. Okay. Someone pointed out something important, I guess. The main.cpp file name over here is not in any way a standard. It's a convention that I use and a convention that I hope people use, because when I can't find the entry point to someone's program, I get very frustrated. So main.cpp is a very common place to put your entry point. However, it's not required that your entry point, the file that contains your entry point, is called main. Somebody asked if this is okay. This formatting style is okay in the C++ class just because it's a very common formatting style for C++. I still prefer this because this just looks nicer to me. Okay, so inside here we have our lines of code that are logically grouped into our main function by these encapsulating curly braces. So what happens here is that because this is the entry point, our program execution will start with this function. The first thing that the operating system will do is start with this function. And this function is going to be just line after line of executable code until we hit a return statement that specifies that the program should exit. Now, these two lines of executable code are kind of interesting. The first one, we have std : cout, followed by bitwise shift operator, followed by a string literal, terminated by a semi. Now, this is very, very common with C++ statements, where you will have a statement terminated by a semi, and the semi indicates to the C++ compiler that this statement is done. Now, unlike languages like JavaScript, where you can omit the semi, you can't in C++, which means that, again, whitespace is not important. I could just as easily have these lines on the same line if I wanted to, because they are delineated by this curly, which is very, very important for people to remember. This code might look possible to understand by a human because of the way that the lines are, or the new lines are positioned, but in order to make the C++ compiler know that we are talking in terms of 3 statements, we must put semis at the end of them. That's very important. As far as what this line of code actually does, the first bit, we are accessing std with the 2: syntax, or the namespace resolution operator. What we are doing here is we are reaching in to a bag of functionality called the standard namespace, or std. The standard namespace is where all standard C++ functionality, or the vast, vast majority, I don't want to say all just in case there's an exception, but the vast majority of standard C++ functionality will be logically grouped together inside of this, what's called a namespace, the std namespace. In fact, if we put our mouse over it, you'll notice it says namespace std. A namespace, again, is a logical grouping of code. It allows us to place variables and classes and structures and type defs and all that good stuff inside of a container that does not leak out into any other of the containers you might have. Namespaces are a great way to organize your code. Now, we're not going to be talking about namespaces too much, but I do want to kind of give you a rough overview of what they are and what they're used for, so that you can understand the fact that we are reaching into the std container to grab a particular member of that namespace called cout. Now, cout is what's called, and yes, someone did point out that the std namespace was made available to us by including iostream. There's a variety of other standard C++ headers that will also add even more members into the std namespace. Somebody asked, so is the std namespace an instance of a class? No. An std namespace is a logical grouping. Think of it like a file and folder hierarchy of functionality. Okay. Someone pointed out, so without std : the compiler wouldn't understand the command cout. That's true. Without any additional stuff, which we will be going over some ways in order to not have to prefix everything with std, but without any of that code, the compiler cannot find out where cout is defined, because we are not reaching into that bag of functionality right now. We are just accessing the global namespace, and cout is not a member of the global namespace. Therefore, it's not accessible without qualifying it with the std namespace resolution. Somebody asked, so : is like the dot operator. Yes, in certain languages, namespaces are resolved with the dot operator. In C++, they're not. Namespaces are always resolved with the : operator. Someone says, last time I did any programming was using iostream.h and only used cout without std. Care to go into this for a little? iostream.h is an older version of, I believe iostream.h was standardized in the previous version of C++. I might be mistaken, but that is going to be older code. In C++, at least as of C++ 03, which I'm most familiar with, in C++ 11, the standard name for iostream is simply iostream, and every bit of functionality in iostream is encompassed with the namespace of std. Can you create a namespace? Yes. But we are not going to be creating namespaces quite yet. Okay. So I'm just scrolling through this really quickly before I move on into what cout does. Are custom class libraries included later on, just like modules in Python? Yes. Custom class libraries are, there's actually a two-step process to C++, which I'm not sure if we'll be going over the full process, but one aspect of that process is to include the headers. Headers, think of headers, and the reason I am getting into this even in a beginner class is I want to really nail home the fact that headers and the include directive are all about getting additional functionality into your program and organizing your program in a way that doesn't, well, blow up.
Okay, so let's go ahead and continue on the line.
All right, so we reach into the std namespace, and then we go ahead and we grab the cout object. Now, we're not going to be getting into objects in this class, but I just want to point out and at least get this term in people's heads. We are accessing the cout object. And what we're doing with the cout object is we are applying an operator. This operator has special meaning when related to the cout object. And the meaning that it has is you can think of it like take whatever's on the right and stuff it into whatever's on the left. So we're taking what's on the right here, this hello world string literal, and we are stuffing it into the cout object. As a result, the cout object will turn around and print that text out into the screen. So what do I mean by string literal? As I talked about, I kind of briefly mentioned earlier that there's the concept of different data types in C++. The string data type is a way to represent text. And it has what's called a literal syntax, where we have these double quotes followed by arbitrary text that could be whatever we want it to be. And we encompass it by these double quotes. I refer to this as a string literal. And the string literal, again, is how you work with, or how you define constant text within a program. So what we do with the string literal is we take it and we stuff it into the cout object, and as a result, things get printed out to the screen. We can stuff as many things as we want. We can continuously say stuff like, if we wanted to. So we can continuously send these string literals into cout. But they don't just have to be string literals. We could also send in numbers as well. This number would be actually printed as a text number, as text, the text 33. It won't be printed with any ASCII code or anything like that, if you're familiar with that sort of thing. This will be printed out as the text 33. Does anybody have any questions about cout right now? No, this does not have to do with, this isn't a function call. It is kind of a function call, but it's actually, more appropriately, it's a custom operator that we're taking advantage of. The std cout syntax has, actually, I'm very disappointed because the syntax is a little funky, and you won't really have the context to understand this syntax or how it's made until later in the class. So you'll just kind of have to take it for granted for now. But there's a way that you can make this syntax work within the C++ language, but it's not the same as calling a function. Somebody asked an interesting question. Would this work? And the answer is no. This operator does not work with strings to cout. You may only use this operator with cout. That's interesting. I never thought of doing that.
I know, that's a very good question.
Can I run the program to show what it'll look like? Sure. you get hello, comma, world, explanation, dash, whoa, 33. Somebody asks, is the overloaded operator part of the STD namespace? No, it's a part of cout, like somebody else already answered. So cout makes everything a string literal. No, not really. It doesn't make it a string literal, but it makes it a string. See, string literals are these things where we're literally typing in the string data to be represented. But not all strings are going to be constant like that. There's a variety of ways to be able to edit text within C++. The cout object will convert anything we send into it into text, or more specifically into a string.
And Nelson, real quick before we end up with this message getting too far away over here in the IRC, Marlon, I hope I'm saying that right, said something earlier that you might want to mention real quick in case you didn't know it, and that is for those using Visual Studio 2010 and above, it has auto formatting. Highlight the code and then Control-KF. And he says it's nice for when copying code from the web.
Yeah, well, that's cool. Oh, sweet, thanks.
So excellent.
No, I didn't know that. So that was Control K and then F. Okay, can you set cout to a variable for return value or pushing it to an array? I'm not sure I understand that. Okay. So I'm going to assume that everybody here is at least not necessarily comfortable with the syntax. Again, I just want to express the fact that we will not actually be able to explain this syntax very clearly until we get into object-oriented programming and operator overloading. But for now, you're just going to have to take this syntax for granted and sort of memorize it. And a good way to think about it is taking whatever's on the right and stuffing it in whatever's on the left. Okay, so moving on from cout, we have cin. And cin, not surprisingly, is used to access input from the console. And there's a very specific reason why I'm doing it here in Windows. Now, this particular line is not required or even probably desired for the Unix operating systems, Mac OS or Linux, because both of those IDEs actually print your output into a console window. That is a part of your IDE. In C++, that is not the case, or Visual C++, that's not the case. Visual C++ likes to fire it up in its own little command window, which, unfortunately, if I were to run this program, would result in the command window appearing for a split second and then disappearing. Now, there's a few ways to fix it. You could hit Control F5, which will automatically add a press any key to continue to your application. However, because I prefer to run everything that I code inside of a debugger during development, I will always hit F5. And as a result, we do not get that functionality. So the way to deal with this is to go ahead and to in some way instruct C++ to ask us for some input so that we can halt the console window until we type in input. So to do that, the easiest way to do that is just stdcin.get. Somebody asked, is printf and scanf still used? You can still use it, but it's not something you would want to use in C++. C++ is entirely backwards compatible with C. So as a result, there's a lot of weird, or basically all the functionality of C is available in C++, but for the most part, C++ has recreated that functionality for use in C++. Can you change the entry point? Yes, you can if you were to edit the actual executable after it has been generated, but that's silly. Int main is the standard and is what you would want to use at all times. I was actually, funny thing, I was about to point out system pause. People might be familiar with this, and some beginners might come out of this class, and during the course they might look at other tutorials and stuff, and they might see this code right here. to get the result that we saw when we hit Control F5, the exact result, in fact. That being said, this right here is bad. Very, 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 very bad. It is incredibly slow, not necessarily cross-platform, and incredibly high risk of attack. Basically what this is doing is this is launching an entire Windows process to invoke the pause program. Yes, there is a program called pause in your System132 folder, I believe. Now, the reason why it's a security vulnerability is it's not very hard to add another program called pause somewhere else that gets loaded instead of the program you intended to. That security vulnerability alone is enough to stay away from this, but there's also the problem with the decrease in performance because Windows has to start an entirely new process. And not only that, it's not necessarily cross-platform. So, please do not ever use that. Now, there are a few other ways you can get the system to pause. For example, there's the getch or the getCharacter method that's available in the conio.h header, but that is not cross-platform, so we're not going to be using that. Instead, we are going to be using the standard compliant, secure, and not particularly slow method of pausing the console, which is std.syn or stdsyn.get. So, yes. Will syn.get confuse a compiler in Xcode? No. Syn.get is a standard, is part of the C specification. And if your compiler does not support it, then you are not using a compiler that you should be using. Is there a print line to break lines? Yes. Well, there's not a print line method, but you can break lines. And I guess we can talk about that in a second here, or in a few minutes. So I just want to point out that this right here, what we're doing is we're grabbing the syn object or the cin object out of std, and we're invoking the get method. This is a method on it, and that pauses the console window for us Windows users. Okay. Is there a way to concatenate strings? No. Well, yeah, kind. Strings are horrible, horrible things. There are ways to concatenate strings, but there's no built-in way to concatenate strings. The best way of concatenating strings for people who are new to C++ will always be repeatedly using this operator on the cout object. Okay, so the first thing that I want to quickly go over is this. You'll notice that we've repeatedly used the std namespace resolution on both lines 6 and 7, but this is not required. In fact, this is not very common. This isn't a very common use case. Instead, what you will generally see is one of two alternatives. So I'm going to go ahead and nuke the std : syntax from line 6 and 7. You'll notice that I get some errors. If I were to hit Control-Shift-B, I'll get some nice little errors. Cout, undeclared identifier, cin, undeclared identifier, blah, blah, blah. What we have done is we are no longer able to access these two objects because they are no longer in scope. But to bring them into scope, we can, up here, after we include iostream, we can type in using namespace std. As a result, we have now imported everything from std into our global namespace. So now our program compiles and works just like before. Somebody asked, if cin is an object derived from a class, would you not need to create an instance first? The answer is cin is an object that is already instantiated for us. I do want to point out that this isn't the only way to use the using construct. We could import specific objects into our program by simply saying using std cout and using std cin. And I wanted to point that out just because there were some people on the forums who pointed out correctly that you won't generally want to import the entire STD namespace at all times because there's a lot of stuff in it that might be conflicting with other libraries that you might be using. So as a result, this is generally the preferred usage, bringing in specifically what you want. However, we're not going to dock anybody any points for simply saying using namespace STD, as that will be the most concise way of doing it before or until we get into more complex namespace usage. Why do we have to actually define that we're using namespace? Is not automatically included with iostream? Well, the namespace is. The namespace of STD is defined as a part of iostream and all the other C++ standard headers. But as a result, in our program, we don't have access to what the members of STD unless we qualify that access with every particular line of code that we write, or we just globally import everything from the STD namespace. And again, think of it think of STD like a folder with a bunch of files in it that we want to access. Using namespace STD basically jumps into that folder, grabs every single file, cuts it, jumps back into your main folder, and pastes it right in. See, otherwise we would have to qualify every single access to an STD member with the STD namespace, or with STD and the namespace resolution operator. But with this case, we can globally import that namespace. How can we browse iostream header to see what's declared in there? Well, if you feel adventurous, you are certainly welcome to right-click on iostream and say Open Document, and then continuously jump into each one of these other files that are open. But I highly doubt that any of this is going to be useful for anybody here. The correct answer to that question is that you can jump over to msdn.com and you can look through the documentation of that header. And other websites will provide you the documentation for every member of the iostream header, as well as the members of the other headers that are a part of C++. Okay, is it possible to use multiple namespaces? And if so, what happens if you have conflicts of the same name used? That gets a little bit complicated. I don't really want to go into that in this class. There are many features of C++ that allows you to get around that. The answer to the first question is yes, you can have as many namespaces and as many using namespace declarations as you want, but you are correct. You will start to run into name conflicts. You resolve name conflicts using some special C++ syntax, which we'll probably get into later once we start actually talking more about namespaces. Okay, so someone asked, we get this question every time in every one of the classes too. Block select, hold down Alt, click and drag. That gives you a nice little block selection where you can type in as much code as you want on multiple lines simultaneously. So that's definitely a cool little feature. And wow, focus is just failing. Okay, so now that we have a cool little program written that does some awesome stuff, are there any questions, any more questions from the beginners here about what I have typed out and what it does and what the responsibility of any of those aspects that I typed out are? See you, David.
Take care, David.
Would there be a difference in performance resource usage on globally focus on namespace versus calling the specific namespace for each object reference? There will be no runtime or resource usage problems by importing namespaces. That being said, it does put a little bit more strain on the compiler, I imagine, but with computers as fast as they are and the compilers as optimized as they are, I highly doubt that you are going to notice a significant difference. And considering that C++ compilation is incredibly slow in the first place compared to a lot of other languages, you probably wouldn't notice any difference if there is one. Okay, So I want to go ahead and point out
We did have a couple more things that came in real quick.
What is Control K again? That's going to be formatting. So you'll notice if I go ahead and mess up the formatting of this, like ridiculously, you know, do some of this fun stuff, I can go ahead and select all this, hit Control K and then F, or sorry, Control K, Control F, and it'll do its best to format stuff. It looks like it tries as hard as it can to preserve my original formatting, but at least it got the indentation correct. Okay, why return 0? Okay, the entry point function, or in fact all functions in general, have the opportunity to send data back to whoever made this code run. Now, the entry point is special in that this data that we send back is going to be made available to whichever program actually invoked our program. And it's a very common debugging tool that we can use to indicate to other programs that might have invoked our program that there might have been a problem. 0 is the convention for your program successfully executed. If you have anything but 0 and you run your program from another program, that other program will be notified that your program did not successfully execute. And it'll give you the opportunity as a user to look at the error code returned by the program that you ran and look up on the documentation of that program to see what application-specific message it relates to. So remember, 0 is by convention meaning everything is okay. Anything that is not 0 is considered an error, but is going to be application-specific, meaning you define what codes mean what kind of error. Can using be suffixed with any other keyword, or does using namespace only ever appear as such? I'm not sure what you mean. There is one other case of using, used for conflict resolution, which we aren't going to be going over. But other than that, using namespace std, using std : cout, and the other syntax, which we're not going to go over, are, to my knowledge, the only valid syntaxes available, or the only valid syntax that we can use with the using keyword. There will be a video of this. This is being recorded, and it will be made available for download. Is there any way to group a block of text to comment? That's a good question. I was going to bring up comments immediately after this, and then after I talk about comments, I'll actually look in the IDE and see if there is. Well, actually, never mind. I know that there is. What was I thinking?
Actually, after you do comments and you show that, then we'll take a break because we'll be real close to the 2-hour mark.
Excuse me. Okay. So there's a way in C++ and in most programming languages to make text appear that is completely ignored by the compiler. That is called a comment. And there are two types of comments in C++, and these are very similar comments to a variety of languages. So if you came from anything else, you will be very familiar with these. So let's talk about them. The first one is a double // By putting in two double // what we have is text that is ignored by the compiler up to the next line. So every piece of code on this line after the double / is ignored. And yes, it's also ignored by nulls, but we're not talking about that sort of thing. You can place comments pretty much anywhere. So you'll notice I added this comment to the end of this line. And so, yeah, comments are kind of cool, I guess, if you're into that sort of thing. So this is what's called a single line. Apparently my MacBook just decided to show up. What? Anyway, this is a single line comment. And that means who were we using before? And it's only valid from the beginning of, it's only ignored from the beginning of the double slashes to the next line. Now there's also a way to do what are called block comments. A block comment is, just like it kind of implies, or a multi-line comment, is a comment that you specifically specify where the comment begins and where the comment ends. So as a result, you can place a block comment that spans multiple lines. In addition, this is also somewhat of a common use case, though I find slightly gross. You can also place block comments inside of statements. If you really wanted to do that for whatever reason. So yeah, these are comments. And a way to get Visual Studio to automatically comment everything that you select, you simply type in Control-K, Control-C, and everything, you have successfully commented out code. You've made this code ignored by the compiler. To undo it, you simply say Control-K, Control-U. Now, this is the same shortcut used in all of the different languages that Visual Studio supports. Why does space show up between hello world and whoa, but not with whoa 33? That's a good question. String literals include spaces, meaning this space right here is being literally printed out into the console. However, 33 is being appended immediately after this exclamation point. If I were to instead say exclamation point space and run the program, you would get a more consistent output because 33 would be printed after a space. Is there a shortcut for block comment? Not that I know of. Alrighty, so any more questions on commenting?
All right, I think that's gonna, well, that does put us right at an hour and 57 minutes recorded. So before we dive into another,
well, we
go ahead.
Did have one question that came in the chat, and in the chat, I'm trying to, make you sound angry.
No, he may have been, looking for anyone but you to answer it.
All right, he asked. Well, he does ask a good question, but I wish it was in the questions panel. He says, when I use using namespace std, does the compiler import all the objects in std? And the answer is yes. By doing this, every single thing inside of std, which aren't necessarily just objects, get imported into our current scope. So yeah.
Okay, awesome. Now we're at about an hour and 58 minutes. So let's go ahead and, Nelson, did you see that over in IRC?
People are pointed out, wouldn't just import the iostream STDs? In this case, yes. But if I had also, even if, like for example, if I had done this, and I'm just going to throw in another random thing that I know happens to contain stuff in STD, this will actually work just as before. Notice how map is available even though I imported the namespace before I added this include. So this does grab everything out of the STD namespace, whether or not it's been included just yet.
And also, I just wanted to point out real quick about the Control-K plus Control-C for commenting and the Control-K plus Control-U to uncomment. You can show that, Nelson. But I believe what you were answering a minute ago was, is there a hotkey for doing a multi-line comment?
Not that I know of.
Yeah, not that I know of. And Ty just asked a quick question as well.
Beyond what was actually, does it bloat on compile? No. Well, maybe. It's not going to bloat in runtime. In runtime, there's going to be no difference between if you imported the entirety of STD or not. But during compile time, yes, the C++ compiler will have more to keep track of. But like I said before, C++ is a very slow language to compile, and any little memory overhead that you add to it by using namespace std is going to be drowned out from that fact. So I would not worry about any performance considerations when using namespace std. It's not going to bloat anything.
And we do have one question in regards to the coop, or the ecoop is asking, what is bloat?
Bloat is going to be just additional stuff in either memory or in the compiled executable or the memory of the compiler that is unnecessary.
Perfect.
What's the difference between compiling and runtime? Well, I can answer that when we get back.
Yeah, let's go. We're 2 hours on the dot. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and then, gentlemen, we will continue after that. So I'm pausing the video. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So take a look over in the questions panel, Nelson, see if we had any questions come in for you.
Alrighty. In that case, nominating a global namespace, can you still use different namespaces? Yes. This actually doesn't nominate a global namespace. You have a global namespace. This just brings everything from std into your global namespace. You can bring in as many namespaces as you wish using this syntax into the global namespace. If you don't include iostream, can you do iostream std cout thing? No. You must use this syntax to include the iostream header in order to use the cout object. There's no other way to do that. Will using namespace std make any noticeable performance difference? No, none at all. Similar tutorials about Java and JavaScript. JavaScript, very likely. Java, not very likely. Can you make a namespace that uses another namespace? You can nest namespaces, yeah. Okay, somebody did ask previously in the chat about the difference between include iostream and the using namespace. And that is a completely valid question, because in a variety of languages, all you do is import namespaces. You don't have to include files. C++ does not work like that. C++ actually compiles your code sequentially, meaning it starts at the top of the file and compiles line after line after line. Unlike other languages that allow you to have circular references, C++ does not, at least not in a very convenient way. There are ways to get around that, but not what we're talking about just yet. So what's happening here is literally the contents of iostream, this file, are being copied and pasted into line 1. Everything that is in iostream is being placed right here in line 1. However, everything in iostream, or at least almost everything, is encapsulated by the std namespace, meaning although the things exist as of line 2, they are not imported, meaning that they're there, but you can't access them without qualifying them with the std namespace. The using the std's namespace, or using namespace std line, actually makes it available, makes everything inside the std namespace available to us without having to qualify everything inside of it. So, for example, if I were to take this line out, I would have to say on both of these lines std : : By instead saying using namespace std, I can get away with not having to qualify that. Okay. A good namespace from during break I'd like to see explained. I guess I'm still a little confused as to what the difference between including the iostream and using. They're related, but they're not the same thing. Did I answer that? Because I noticed you're probably typing that question as I was talking. Did I answer that, or should I talk a little bit more about it? Due to the sequential compiler behavior, do you have to write any functions before you can call them, i.e. write them above the function call? You can get away with what are called prototypes, right?
Yeah.
Help me. Okay, you can get away with that by prototyping the function and forward declarations, and then define them elsewhere on the file. But we're not talking about functions just
It was
yet.
funny.
We're trying to keep this
you
down.
got so silent, I thought you just went away.
No, I just completely forgot the name of that piece of syntax. And it is necessary due to the sequential way that the compiler works. Everything has to be defined or at least forward declared before usage. How did I type in multiline? I held down the Alt key and I just clicked and drug. Including more libraries could affect the performance of a program. They could increase the size of your executable. Simply by including this iostream up here, the executable size is actually greatly increased by a surprising magnitude. But generally speaking, they will not impact performance other than the size of the executable itself.
Okay, so keeping us on track, I think it's time, now that we've done our very basic hello world, to move into variables.
Alrighty. Well, right now, we have a program. And this program is really cool, but there's a small problem with our program, at least something that we're not representing here that would actually make this program useful. And that is everything right here is a literal. We are only using literals. This literal right here is the string literal, meaning that's the type of it. It's a string. Well, it's actually not a string. It's a character, constant character pointer. But regardless, think of it like a string literal. Right here we have what's called an integer literal, which is similar to what we have here on line 9. These are pieces of data, but they are literal pieces of data. Now, a program, really at a very conceptually, a very high-level overview of what a program is, a program takes an input, performs operations on that input, and produces an output. Now, in order to make the program actually produce interesting results with the input and produce interesting output, we need to use what are called variables. And variables are a way to store data that might change during program execution. In fact, they're the only way that we could possibly get user input into our program for processing reasons. So, for example, let's go ahead and declare a variable. I just declared a variable. I want to point out that what I have done here is I've not produced any executable code. This is not code that executes. What I have done is I've asked C++ to reserve 4 bytes of memory for usage of storing numbers. And I told C++ to reserve that bit of memory for me, but also to name it something. I have named that piece of memory my number. So when int main starts, the memory required to hold this data will be allocated for me. It will be made available to me. It will be reserved. And I can continuously, throughout this function, reference this my number identifier to access that little bit of memory. Now, the reason I said 4 bytes is that the integer data type is, in this instance, 4 bytes long. Now, all variables are a data type followed by an identifier, followed optionally by an initializer, and terminated with a semicolon. So, data type, identifier, semi. Now, I can do some interesting stuff with this number. I can say my number equals 10. And then I could say something like cout, my number is my number. And then I could also say my number equals 20. Now I'm going to ask a question. This is a question for primarily people who are completely new to programming. And I know I haven't really explained what's going on yet. I just want to get a feel for how people are thinking about how this program executes, how each individual line affects the state of the program until the end of the function call. So I want to ask people, what is the output of this program? And before other people say that this question is silly, I want to point out that understanding the sequential flow of instructions is incredibly important. So for complete beginners, for people who are completely new to programming, what's the output of this program? Apparently this question smells bad.
Does it now? Where'd you get that from?
KN00TCN.
Oh, somebody said it smells bad?
Yeah. Okay, we got some 10s, we got some 20s, we got some zeros. We got output the same as before. Well, let's go ahead and run this program and see what happens. We get my number is 10. Now, the sequential nature of programming is one of the most important things for people to have to force themselves to think like if they're not used to thinking like this before. And what I mean about the sequential nature of programming is that every single line of code has a state for the rest of the program. And that state of the program might change, but it's not going to affect any line of code above it. So you'll notice we start here on line 6. Now, I did say that this is not executable code. This does not produce anything more than simply the C++ compiler initializing our function with enough data reserved to store this information. So the first line of executable code actually is right here, line 8, where we tell C++ that we want to access the piece of memory that it gave us, that it allocated and named my number. We want to access that piece of memory, and we want to take the value of 10 and we want to stuff it into that memory. We have taken the decimal value, the decimal integer value of 10, and we've placed it into the data that C++ has reserved for us. On line 9 does not think about everything in isolation. Line 9 doesn't care about what's above it or what's below it or anything. All it cares about is what the program state is at the point that this code executes. So what we have here is, first of all, we have the myNumber variable being concatenated to this string. And when I say concatenation, I'm not really referring to the concatenation people were asking about earlier. I'm just saying that the value of my number is appended to the end of this string, or the string literal. And when I say the value of my number, what I'm referring to is the data that's currently stored in this memory location that we've named. So we've taken the data that is currently inside of my number, which is currently 10, and we've appended to the string, and then we've stuffed the result of that into cout, which turns around and then prints that output to the console. Sean, what error are you getting? If you just print that out, and I'll get to that in a second. Or you're getting a myNumber undeclared identifier. Could that? Do you have line 6 right here? You're going to have to declare your variable before usage.
And
so make sure you
don't forget it's also case sensitive.
Yep, it is case sensitive. We don't have any say in this, or can we ask questions? Can we? You can ask questions.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
and I agree with Great Wolf over in the IRC. He said if you wanted to, you could just use the debugger. They don't have to know anything about it, but you can show its execution line by line. I believe you did that Monday, didn't you?
I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit F5. And what we have here is the debugger. And the debugger is a little piece of software that runs and attaches itself to the program. And it's going to allow us to watch execution as it goes line by line through our program. More importantly, it's going to allow us to look at whatever our variables contain at the moment. So you notice if I hover over my number, you'll see my number contains this value. Now, this is a garbage value because it hasn't been initialized to anything. So if I go ahead and hit F10, you'll notice that this little arrow goes down one line. That means it has executed this line of code. you'll notice now my number has the value of 10. So this line points to the next statement that's going to be executed when I hit F10. So when I do hit F10, you'll notice that if you jump back to the console window, you'll see my number is 10 is printed. So now if I hit F10, my number gets set to 20. But you'll notice the output doesn't change. The output is not affected at all by us changing the variable because that code is already executed. It's no longer relevant to our program. So once I hit F10 again, you'll notice that the program pauses and waits for me to hit enter. And once I do hit enter, you'll notice we jump back to return 0. And if I hit F10 and F10 again, well, then we'll get into a bunch of cool little fun stuff. But if I hit F5, the program will then terminate.
And just to drive home the point, you could copy line 9 and paste it after 11.
Yep. Oh, actually, what I could do is I could even do this, and then I could, because there was somebody who was asking.
Oh, okay.
And I did want to point, I promised him that I would take a look at it, but then I forgot. What this does right here is this inserts a new line. The /n character turns into a new line. So by appending this, these two lines will be printed on new lines of output. So now if I hit F5, you'll notice it'll say, my number is 10, and then my number is 20. Okay, after initializing, shouldn't my number hold a 0? Well, I want to point out really quickly that as of right now, my number has not been initialized. It has been declared, but it has not been initialized. In C++, C++ does not do automatic initialization. A lot of languages do, C++ does not. Meaning C++ will not initialize your values to anything consistent, and their uninitialized state should never be dependent on or used. So I want to point that out. So currently my number contains garbage that should not be used in your program. So somebody asked a good question. What would happen if I took out my number equals 10? Well, in Visual C++, you will get a runtime error. So if I run this program, you'll notice I get a, well, derp. You'll notice I get a runtime check failure number 3. The variable, my number, is being used without being initialized. Now, this is behavior of Visual C++, and this is not necessarily true for any other instance or any other implementation of C++. The reason we're getting this right here is because Visual C++ inserted some additional checks and additional logic into our code for debugging purposes. Now, if I just forced it, I could say continue, and you'll notice I do get this uninitialized value being printed out. However, this is a bug. Using any uninitialized value for any purpose is a bug and should never be considered valid code. The fact that C++ warned, or the Visual C++ warns us about it is actually a cool feature of Visual C++ that'll prevent us from making stupid mistakes. Is it a random number of any sort? Where does it come from? This particular value comes from the debugger. To make things easier to identify while debugging your program, it'll automatically initialize it to this value in particular. However, during normal execution, the value is undefined. It could be anything. Now, there could be some situations where the number is consistent, but those situations should not be relied upon. The number is undefined and for all intents and purposes invalid. Is there a standard for naming variables? There's not a standard as much as a process of naming variables. Generally speaking, you want your names of variables to carry semantic value or carry meaning within your program. There are certain standards for naming variables, such as Hungarian notation, where we prefix our variables with the type that they contain. but those notations are silly and annoying and ugly and not recommended in any way, shape, or form to be used after the year 2000, what, like 1?
So tell us how you feel, Nelson. All right.
So avoid using any sort of Hungarian notation naming conventions. The important naming convention, other than make the variable make sense within the context of your program, is that you'll want to start out with a lowercase and delineate every word with an uppercase name or an uppercase character. So this is called camel casing, and it's very important. It is a very standard way to name local variables in a variety of languages, and should generally be carried out. Can variables have spaces? Well, no. You'll hear me say the word identifier a lot, and an identifier is a special kind of token, I guess you could say, when parsing different languages, and different languages have different rules for what an identifier means. So whenever I say this thing, this construct expects an identifier, what I'm talking about is this construct expects you to follow some rules. Those rules are: it must start with an underscore or a character. It cannot start with a number. This would be invalid. Inside of an identifier, you can have as many underscores, as many numbers, and as many characters as you want.
Best identifier ever.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised if there is an identifier in some of the C++ standard libraries called that, because I've seen some stuff in there. Okay, so basically when I say identifier, I'm saying something that follows these rules. And function names as well as integer names are going to always be named by identifiers.
And while we're right here at it, let's go ahead and answer Stephen's question, which is, you said C++ is case sensitive, so my number with a capital N is different from my number with a lowercase n.
Yep.
Those are all different right there. Fail, Nelson.
However, if we see you doing this in any of the homework, you'll be very upset. Differentiating variables by casing is absolutely silly.
Yeah.
But you are correct in saying that they are different variables. Miranda, I'm not sure about that. Am I the only one who cannot find or open PDB files show up in the debugger on multiple lines whenever I execute the code? Some person mentioned above that it could be a permissions thing. He said that he fixed it by something about like right-clicking on the executable and saying to like allow it to run or something like that. I'm thinking it could be some sort of conditional thing.
We'll be going over where homework gets sent and all that stuff in Monday's class. Once we're down to the regular students that'll be in the class, and next Friday's class as well.
Okay, so any questions about basic variable usage? I guess I can also explain basic types.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because I believe
that's a good idea.
Yeah. Basic types. So a type, think about a type like think about a type as the constraints of the data that can be stored in a variable. Now, the int type can store all whole numbers, positive or negative. However, what if you wanted to store a decimal value? So I'm going to go ahead and move this code up here so I'm initializing it on the same line I'm defining it. I'm going to talk about a few other types. We have the float type and the double type. Now, the float type and the double type do allow us to have positive or negative values with decimal points in them. They differ in one important respect. the double type will allocate twice as much memory as the float type. Of course, the consequences of that are, well, it takes more memory, and you can store twice as much precision in either one of these types. So it's very important. There's another kind of type called the Boolean. Now, a Boolean is a type that can contain one of two values, true or false. Booleans, oh, someone asked a good question in the chat. But Booleans allow us to assign the variable to one of two values, true or false. Okay, so one of the questions was, what does the F mean behind the 10.5F? That's a good question. Now, you'll notice that, oh, come on, give me a warning. Give me something, Visual C++. Okay, well, there we go. Okay, so you'll notice that if I do this, if I have this value has so much, it is so precise, it has so many significant digits that it cannot be stored in a float value. So you'll notice that when I compile this, if I hit Control-Shift-B, I'll get this nice little warning, initializing, truncation from double to float. What this means is, by storing this value into a float variable, we are going to lose some of this precision. Now, the F suffix is not required in C++. However, what it does is it changes the type of this from a double to a float. By default, all constants, all constant numbers with a decimal place in them are double literals. So this is a double value. This is a float value. This is a Boolean value. This is a string value. This is a double value. By adding the F suffix, we are changing it from a double value into a float value. So now the significance of this is not as important as other languages. We did get a good question. Isn't there also a few other types like strings and matrices? Yes, but they're not built-in types, and they have some very interesting behavior associated with them that we'll be covering a little bit later, because they are not like normal data types. They are more advanced. I actually don't know if C++ has a built-in matrix type. I know it has a built-in string type. I don't know if it has a built-in matrix type. Why do you have to add the F at the end of the value if you've already declared the type as a float? Well, this part right here, this declaration, is completely independent of the initialization. The initialization is what we're setting the value to. The declaration is what we're defining what data type the value has, meaning there's no real relationship between these two aspects. So by putting the F here, I'm specifying that I want a float literal instead of a double literal. Okay. I want to point out something about the C++ programming language that will be confusing and can cause issues. And that is, C++ is incredibly liberal about values and conversions. As a result, for example, Booleans actually have an integer value. The Boolean false has the integer value of 0, whereas the Boolean true has the integer value of 1. Any value that is not 0 can be converted into a true Boolean, whereas any value that is not false can be, or that is false, or that is 0 can be converted into a false Boolean. How can I bring up the error window? If you want to bring up the error list, it's going to be under View, Other Windows, Error List. Okay, So I want to point out that there is a very liberal way that C++ treats data, but I want to stress the fact that choosing and architecting your code based off certain data types should be a very conscious decision that you are consistent with. And taking advantage of the fact that all of these different types can easily be converted into their corresponding other types will ultimately lead you down to some very interesting problems. Like implicitly converting doubles into floats, you lose precision. Implicitly converting expressions into Booleans, you could get unexpected results very easily. So I want to point out that I really do prefer, and I prefer that you think about your variables as only being able to contain the types that is specified. So an integer should only contain or ever be assigned to an integer value unless you are explicitly doing something specifically. Floats should only really ever contain floats unless you are trying to use another library. You're trying to assign a double to some other person's code and you'll have to convert it into a float. But other than that, you should architect your types very specifically. A double should really only contain double values, and Boolean should really only ever contain true or false. Okay, so this was just a basic sort of overview really quickly into variables and data types. Do the complete beginners into programming, do you guys kind of understand variables and why data types are important? Merlon, the difference between a float and a double is a double allocates twice as much memory as a float.
Precision.
Roland Stone, are there any specific questions that I could answer? What about the character? We're not going to be talking about characters just yet. We're just talking about numbers and Booleans at the moment. What would I use a double for? I would use a double in any instance where I need to contain a relatively precise decimal point value. Can you enforce not allowing conversion from double to float? Not particularly. What you could do is you could enable in your project settings, treat all warnings like errors. And you will notice that in a lot of different cases, when converting between floats and doubles, you will get warnings. So double can have more than one decimal after the point? Yeah, a double can have many. Just like a float can, but the double can have more without losing precision. Could I make types that are even more precise than a double? Certainly. You could create your own custom type that has the functionality of allocating as much memory as it needs in order to store an infinitely precise variable. What's the highest precision of a float? That's a good question. I don't know it off the top of my head.
No,
Jason?
not off the top of my head.
Well, we can try to. Look, I mean, if you notice this, notice that the float is being truncated here. Actually, both the double and the floats are being truncated at a certain decimal, which probably has to do with the formatting I'm using on cout at the moment. So maybe if I launched into the debugger. Yeah, I don't know the exact precision, but you can play around with it and find out where it fails. And Great Wolf does point out something. Definitely, if you guys are interested in this, check out the IE 754 floating point specification. Steve, I'm not familiar with that particular cout command, although it could, I mean, sure, if it exists, that's how you do it. I'm just not familiar with that myself. I had never needed to print out something that precise in cout. Doesn't the precision change with the processor bits? It could, I suppose. I'm generally speaking, however, floats and integers will still be 32-bit values, depending, no matter what architecture you're running on. That's still determined by the CPU, or not the CPU. It's still determined by the compiler. The compiler is in charge of determining what size all of these different variables have. Yeah, I actually did read that article, Great Wolf. It's definitely an interesting one. Okay, so, alrighty. So we have variables, we have different types.
So now let's start looking at getting some user input.
Yes. Okay, so let's say we wanted to write a simple program that reported the age of the user and the age of the user in a year.
Now, why don't we go ahead and have everyone throw up their hands that want to follow along, and they don't have to keep up with your speed, but when you get to the end, then we'll make sure everybody's got it. So since this is something kind of a new thing, for those that want to follow along, put your hands up over in the webinar software. And just take note of what Nelson has erased. All right, so let's get going. Let's do some stuff.
Okay, so let's go ahead and declare an int age variable. The reason I chose int is because I want to represent age as a whole number. Then I'm going to prompt the user for their age. Then I'm going to do something pretty fun here. I'm going to go ahead and use cin. I'm going to say cin, and then I'm going to use the opposite operator right there. And then I'm going to put in the variable age. This code will tell cin to ask the user for input and to put it into the age variable. Now, this is very important. The cin object knows that the type of my variable is an integer and will convert the text, automatically will convert the text that the user inserts into the console window into a number. The final thing that we must do is we must type in cin.ignore. Now these two lines are only valid if you are on Windows. If you are using an IDE that has a built-in console window, go ahead and just ignore these lines. But if you're using Windows, place these lines in at the end of your program, but before the return 0. What the cin.ignore will do is whenever we ask cin to give us data, it's going to leave in a character in the input buffer. It's going to leave in a new line because the user is going to hit enter, and as a result, that new line character goes into the buffer. And what's going to happen is because that new line stays in the buffer and doesn't get extracted by cin on this line, if we immediately do cin.get, we're going to get that character right back, and the program's going to terminate. So you want to add the cin.ignore before. So go ahead and type that out and put your hand down when you're done.
All right, so like Nelson said, once you have that typed out, make sure to put your hand down. This actually works a lot easier for us over in BuzzNet.
should have probably put everyone. Did you put everyone's hands down?
No, actually,
because some people might be AFK.
Actually, we're only down to just a couple left anyway, so I think we're okay to go ahead and start explaining.
Okay. Well, I am going to throw in some more code actually afterwards. Sorry about that.
Make sure to update your program now.
My bad. I feel bad now.
There's no reason to feel bad, Nelson. All right, Nelson.
Alrighty. So, what we have here is a program. And if we run this program, let's say I entered my age as 10, and I hit enter. It'll say you are 10 years old, and in 1 year you will be 11. So obviously a very interesting marketable program. And how it's working is that here on line 6, we are declaring the existence of an integer named age. Then we are prompting the user to enter an input. And then we are actually telling Cin to grab the input from the console window and stuff it into this age variable. On line 11, we are then outputting both the UR, then followed by the value inside the age variable, followed by years old. Then we create a new variable, which we initialize to age plus 1, and we name this variable age in a year. Then on line 14, we output in 1 year you will be age in a year, followed by an exclamation point. Now on line 16 is very important. Now Cin by default does not eat the new line character that happens when you hit enter. When you hit enter, a /n character appears into the input buffer, which means that if we did not have the cin.ignore, the result we would get is an immediately terminating program. Because we place the cin.ignore here, we're going to clear the buffer. And by clearing the buffer, then we can go ahead and do cin.get, which won't immediately return. It'll wait for fresh input from the user. Okay, what does /n mean again? /n means new line. So this places the next next characters on a new line. What would happen if we don't place the cin.ignore on? Well, if we don't place the cin.ignore, what we'll get is a console window that immediately closes. By placing the cin.ignore, because the new line that we type in by hitting the enter key gets eaten, the cin.get doesn't get triggered or tripped up. Okay, are there any questions about this until we move on to maybe some basic control flow?
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. So in programming, we often have to make decisions. A program that is linearly executed can't actually express the logic that we would normally need to express. Actually, someone asked a good question before. What happens if we just put in characters? You'll notice that basically what happens is these characters break the program. Let's go ahead and, what's going to happen is that sin doesn't actually get initialized to anything, and these characters get stuck into the input buffer, and then they trip up the sin.get line, and the thing just blows up, and just, it's not good. Okay. Okay, do I have to put a sin.ignore after every sin statement, or just once is enough? Once is enough for the purposes here. We'll get into more advanced stream stuff later. And again, it's another thing that I'm slightly disappointed about C# or C++ with, is kind of how we have to introduce the concept of streams to people who are so new to the language. But that's just the nature of the beast. There's a lot of things you have to keep in mind when working with C++. Okay, so right, if statements. So again, our program isn't very interesting right now. It doesn't make any decisions. And one of the things that we'll need to do in order to express logic is to put in conditional stuff. I mean,
are you reading, Nelson, or?
Yeah, someone threw me off. What would happen if we did this? Well, if we did this and stuck it in a while true loop, we would actually get we would go ahead and just get everything that we type in just gets sent back into the output buffer. So that's kind of fun, I guess.
For 3 seconds.
I'm easily amused. Okay, so getting into if statement. If statements are basic control flow, and what that means is we can change what lines of code get executed depending on a Boolean expression, an expression that evaluates or is converted into a true or false value. So let's go ahead and talk about what we can do here. So I can go ahead and say, I can stick this down here, and I can go ahead and say, if age is greater than 100, I could say, see out your old. If age is smaller or equal to 100, you're less than old. Okay, what's going on right now is we are using if statements. And sorry, I'm fresh off an ActionScript project. Does switch exist? It does, but we're not talking about switches. What the if statement is we have here the keyword if, followed by a paren, followed by a Boolean expression, followed by an ending paren, followed by an open curly, followed by a block of code, and then a closed curly. So what happens here is we are conditionally executing the code inside of this block depending on if this expression holds true. Now, the operator we're using here is a little interesting. We're using the greater than operator. Now, there's a variety of different operators that we can use to express Boolean logic in C++. We have some of the most basic. We have the equality operator, the inequality operator, the greater than operator, the less than operator, the greater than or equal to operator, the less than or equal to operator. These are some of the most important Boolean operators that you'll be using. So what we're doing here in this case is we are using the greater than Boolean operator, and we're applying these two operands. We're applying the value stored in this memory location to the literal 100. We're asking if the value stored in this variable is greater than this literal 100, we are going to jump into executing line 21. If this statement is false, if this evaluates into 0 or false, what happens is this if statement does not execute and essentially gets ignored, or rather the block inside of it does. So in line 24, we have a similar thing. We are saying if age is smaller than or equal to 100, we print out this code, or this text, and then we terminate the block. So if we go ahead and run this program, and let's say we type in 101, we get, you are 101 years old. You're old. In 1 year, you will be 102. Let's throw in some new lines here really quickly. If we put in 40, we get, you are 40 years old, you're less than old, in 1 year, you'll be 41. So, if statements. So, actually, I'm wondering, how many people who are completely new to programming are still around? Oh, sweet. Oh, we're getting a bunch of hands, too.
Awesome.
Awesome. How are you guys feeling about if statements? I mean, they are a very logical construct, but they might not. They might seem a little
iffy. A little
crazy if you're not. Yeah, a little
Very
iffy.
good, Joey.
We're not getting into the ternary yet, because once we introduce the ternary, the lines of code that I write will be significantly reduced in the classes, and nobody's going to be able to understand any of it.
So just throw it in comments or something. Just do basic syntax for them again. I mean, I know they're looking right at it.
Ternary?
No. If. Just inside comments or multi-line comment, just where inside your parentheses, just put the word test expression.
Yeah. If Boolean expression.
Perfect.
Alrighty, sweet. So, yeah. Now, here are some interesting things we can do with if statements. We can introduce the concept of an else. You'll notice that this pattern is very, 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 very common in programming, where we'll have a Boolean expression right here and some code that executes given that Boolean expression. Somebody does ask, does the Boolean have to be contained within a paren? Yes. The Boolean expression must be contained within parens.
That's why I wanted Nelson to put just the basic syntax up in comments like that.
Okay, so this pattern is very common, where we'll have one if statement that says, okay, is this expression true? And then we'll have another statement that says, is the opposite of this expression true? And it's so common in programming that there's actually a construct we can use to just write this a lot cleaner. And that is the else. And the else basically means if this expression is true, execute this code. Otherwise, execute this code. So some questions about what we can do with the else. The else statement is only valid immediately after an if statement. So it's only valid immediately following the last curly brace of an if statement. So we have an if statement, we have an open curly, a closed curly, and then the else keyword, followed by another open curly and a closed curly. Are we going to be covering things as pointers, like pointers as well? Yep, actually that's up next here. That was
yeah,
such a joke.
pointers will be in the
pointers later.
Pointers will be in the 101 course, though. Not tonight's class, though.
Don't worry, Ashley. We will be going over pointers very, very in-depthly.
And you will master them.
Yep. Okay. Is there an else if as well? Yeah, you can actually do some else if logic as well, just combining these two things. We could say else if age is greater than 50. So now we're getting a little bit more complicated, where we have this if statement followed by an else if statement followed by an else statement. So this else statement will only execute if these two if statements did not execute. Can we omit curlies? Yes, you can. That being said, if you're comfortable with omitting curlies in C#, then yeah, you can omit them in C++ as well. That being said, for people who are new, I do not recommend omitting curlies. And the reason is that omitting curlies combined with no automatic indentation can produce results that you do not expect. But if you are familiar with them already, then by all means use them. But I just don't recommend them to be that syntax to be used by beginners. Yes, extra curlies. Which surprisingly, this is completely valid C++ code. Is a bit ridiculous, though.
Yeah.
Perception. Okay, so well, that was fast.
Definitely let's spend a minute with logical operators as well.
Okay, we can also put in logic operators. And we can put in, so you see that here are some binary operators we can use that will return a Boolean value. We have equality, inequality, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or the less than or equal to. We also have the logical and the logical or, which my fingers were off. The logical and is going to be, or the exclusive and, I guess you could say, or sorry, not exclusive. There's a special name for the short-circuiting behavior of them. What it allows you to do is combine multiple Boolean expressions. So, for example, let's put in some truth tables. Okay. So what's going on right now is that we have these two Boolean or logical operators that we can use to combine Boolean expressions to, well, however many times we want, really. And these are what are called truth tables. These specify the behavior of these operators. So you'll notice with and, both operands must be true for the result to be true. So you'll notice true and false is false, false and true is false, and false is false, whereas true and true is true. Somebody does ask, shouldn't we just write equals instead of equals equals? Equals equals is the equality operator. I could actually go ahead and talk about that really quickly because that's something very important to understand. So let's say we wanted to say if age is equivalent to 30, we could say cout special message for 30-year-olds. I don't know. We can go ahead and say if age is equal to 30. This is the equality operator. If I were to put in a single equal sign, this is the assignment operator. And guess what? In the magical land of C++'s liberal use of automatic type conversion, this results in compilable code. Equals will mean set age to 30, and 30 in a Boolean context is true. Meaning, if I wanted to hit F5 right now, I could type in anything I wanted. I can type in 9,001, and I can go ahead and hit enter, and look at this. You are 9,001 years old. Special message for 30-year-olds. In 1 year, you will be 31. So that really doesn't make any sense. The reason that doesn't make any sense is we are assigning age to 30 in this expression. This is the assignment operator. This is the equality operator. The equality operator is very, very different from the assignment operator, mainly because it won't actually change the value of what we're comparing against. And it's going to go ahead and simply compare these two values. And if these two values are equal, it will return true. So if I go ahead and hit F5 again and I type in 31, you'll notice we get you're 31 years old, you're less than old, and in 1 year you'll be 32. So that's why in this case I was using the equality operator. And what if you declare a variable with that? I doubt that'll work. However, that being said, this will work. This is a completely valid C++ statement that does absolutely 100% nothing. What happens here is age is compared to 10. This expression turns into true, and then that value just goes away. That value isn't used anywhere. So by doing this, it's completely valid C++ code, but we are just getting an expression that evaluates into something, either true or false, and that value just magically goes away and has no meaning anywhere else. What if you put code that returned false? I'm not sure what you meant by that. Could you rephrase that? If I put in 5 equals 1, still completely valid C++ code, the expression is false. This expression is false. Because I'm not assigning or using the value of this expression anywhere else, this code doesn't do anything. This code has no meaning. Now, if I did int age, yeah. I don't think we're going to get into the difference between bitwise and logical. That's going to require a little bit of talk about how binary works, which will definitely be explained in the C++ course, but will not be talked about in this particular class. And I don't know about this 101 course either, but it will be at some point. Yeah. Flash77 puts out something interesting, or says something interesting about this. The compiler just thinks no and walks away and moves on. That's pretty much what happens.
Okay, so you want to hop back on the ands and ors?
Yeah. We aren't talking about signed versus unsigned in this class. We will eventually, though. For now, everything we're using is signed.
And we're right at the very end of the class, so we're not going to take the 3-hour mark break. We're just going to wrap things up here because like I said, we're almost there.
I need a cigarette. Okay, so now we have these awesome little truth tables that should kind of explain how these logical operators work. So what we could do is we could say if age equals 30 or age equals, I don't know, 40, then we can say special message for 30 and 40-year-olds. So by using that logical OR, we can now type in 40 or 30 and get that same message. And we can use these operators in this way by following this truth table. Yeah. So you'll notice that in this case, age equals 30. Okay, let's pretend for a second if age is 40. So right now, if age is 40, what we get, if we wanted to kind of break this down, we'll start off with this. Then we'll get into this. Or what am I doing? Which turns into this. Which finally turns into this. So does everybody understand what I've done here? I've broken down the Boolean expression. And you'll notice that I can match up this false or true with this false or true in this truth table, so I know that this turns into true. If you don't want the program to error out as someone types a letter or what you need in code, that would require some input validation, which I don't think we have the time to go over.
Yeah, tonight no, but it is something that we will be doing in this course.
This reminds me of logic class. Well, logic in programming is programming is logic. Like I said in the beginning of the class, and hopefully what people have more who are completely new to programming have a kind of a better context for, is all we've done is we've expressed logic using a predefined language that is understood by both us and the compiler. We've expressed logic in this text form. We've given the text to the compiler, and the compiler then converts this logic into something the computer can understand. Next class should be next week.
As a matter of fact, Nelson, if you could real quick, go ahead and bring up a browser. And I know we have a few new people that have signed up tonight that will be, this is very important, guys. So a few new people that will be joining us in next week's class. This is about to become one of your favorite pages. It is at the top next to chat. It's called Live Classes. So go ahead and click on Live Classes. Very important page. This is where you can keep up with when classes are and what the password is. And that's very important because before all the member-sponsored classes, there is a specific password that's always issued. And then to get to the password, you just come in and give an example. Click on one of the ones that doesn't have a password, Nelson. I mean, just, yeah, click on one of those. Right now, you can see in that box that it says the password will be posted here 10 minutes in advance of the class. And it's actually 5 to 10. Just get on at a minute or so before class time, refresh it, and you'll find the password there. This is very important. This page is very important. After I get the video encoded and upload it, the ones that are member sponsor streaming, so let's go ahead and close that window and show one of the ones that has the video up. So all of our past videos, so the Blender 101, you can just click right there to jump right in and start watching video. And you can get to course information and homework from there as well. So this is a very important page. Make sure you're aware of it because there will be a password that's required on Monday and next Friday's class. Okay?
And I do want to point out that if anybody is a member sponsor and wants to watch the C+ or C# courses,
all the way back to the beginning,
all those videos are up.
Yep. Again,
just jump.
We had the class. We had two different classes, one on Monday and one on Thursday. And if you're completely fresh to programming and you want to jump in the 102 class, be forewarned, it'll be difficult. And how many classes in this series? Well, Stephen, it all comes down to, as long as people are interested, we can push it really far.
So all you need to do in being the next class is be a member sponsor and just register for Monday or register for
And for
Friday.
those of you that aren't member sponsors, we've done several free classes, and I will continue to post free classes. So just keep that in mind. We don't completely forget about those that aren't able to jump in. So Nelson, I think that's everything.
Yeah, and I do want to point out, somebody said, I wish I'm 18 to be a member sponsor, no credit card. We accept payments through PayPal, which you can link up with your bank account. So, yeah.
But to go ahead and wrap things up, thank you guys very much. We had a fantastic turnout tonight, and things went very smooth. A little bit smoother than Monday for the simple fact that we didn't wait around for the IDEs to get installed. So, yeah, I'm extremely pleased with how this turned out. I will be encoding the video tonight or tomorrow. Again, Nelson, if you don't mind, go ahead and jump back over onto 3D Buzz real quick and scroll up to the top. Let's just show everybody this. This is another thing that's important. For those of you that haven't really been over to the site before, click on Forums for me, Nelson. So if you come in and you go to the Forums, over on the right-hand side is, without going into a specific forum, on the right-hand side, you see a list of all of the most recently posted about things. I'm surprised the C+ 101 class from Monday is already fallen off the front page. No, that doesn't have the download link in it. Okay, well, it will be shown. You'll see it on this side later tonight or in the morning. Go ahead and show going into the lounge real quick.
Yes, you could pay through a debit card. You can link a debit card with PayPal or Amazon or Google.
But this is how it'll look. So in here, right there, so here's Monday's class. So you're welcome to grab both classes if you want. And right up underneath that is the UDK class too. I had to break that one up because that was a big class. But anyways, go ahead and jump into the 101 Week 1 Monday's class. So there it is. Just a simple link. Click the link. It'll start downloading. And then feel free to watch it whenever. So hopefully that will be helpful for you guys. Go. But I can't speak now. It's late. But anyways, thank you guys very much. This will conclude the class. And for those of you that are taking the full thing, we're going to see you on Monday or next Friday, whichever class you're in. And again, you are welcome to attend both if you would like. And next week, we'll be getting into an introduction to working with data, where we're going to be talking about more data types. We're going to talk about signed versus unsigned, the size of operator, memory concerns, how memory is made available to you via the stack frames, constants, the auto keyword. There's a whole bunch of stuff we're going to be covering next week, including arrays and introduction to looping. So it should be loads of fun. So thank you guys very much, and we will see you guys later. No homework, okay? So no homework for anyone tonight. The homework starts next week. Thanks, guys, and we're out of here.
See ya.